Church bells ring amidst a crowd of people gathered in front of the towering building, their eyes fixed on its balcony in anticipation of a momentous event. Only moments passed before a man emerged wearing formal attire, accompanied by a blonde lady in an elegant dress, and whispers rose among the attendees, announcing that they had finally appeared. People quickly recognized the lady. She was the renowned Saint Genevieve, and they shared news that she had come in person to purify the venom of the demonic beasts. As for the man standing beside her, he was Duke Shane Blanchard, known as the Sword of the Empire. The onlookers marveled at his extraordinary handsomeness, with some young women believing his beauty was a gift from heaven and that his face glowed with a special light. Everyone agreed that the saint was the only one worthy of the Duke's status, affirming that they formed a perfect couple. A girl wearing a brown hood was eavesdropping on the people's conversation as they called the Duke and the saint of the century and her guardian, circulating rumors about their impending marriage as an inevitable fate. Someone wondered if the Duke had a previous fiancé, and another replied that she had died in an accident 5 years ago, concluding, despite the ill nature of speaking about the dead, that it was for the good of the Empire. Visible emotion appeared on the hooded girl as she heard this talk. With a look tinged with sadness, she whispered to herself that she felt happy because he seemed well. In her memory, Shane Blanchard was her fiancé 5 years ago. She remembers that she had no choice but to leave him for a reason she could never tell him. At that time, she believed he would forget her quickly, especially since their engagement was nothing more than a formal arrangement. She believed that after her departure, her former fiancé and the saint, as the heroes of this world, would reach their happy ending, while she was merely the villainess who tormented them. While she was lost in her thoughts, the voices of the people echoed again, praising the saint as a perfectly suitable future duchess and wishing the couple eternal happiness. With resignation, she decided that this was enough and resolved to find her own way to survive, realizing there was no turning back now. Closing her eyes, she inwardly wished that he would remain in good health from now on. She whispered his name, Shane, and at that moment she thought she had succeeded in changing the end of this world. At the same time, the saint was talking to the Duke about the guests invited to the party, but the Duke seemed absent-minded, prompting her to call out to him inquiringly. The girl realizes it didn't take long to discover how naive her idea was. Then she introduces herself. She is Adeline Bertrand, the only daughter of the Marquis Bertrand's family, and she is also a person reincarnated from another life. She recounts that due to faint memories from her previous life, she initially felt like an outsider. But this feeling changed after seeing her parents' love and sincere concern for her. With 2 reliable brothers, she decided to bury her true feelings and live as a happy child under everyone's care. However, despite her decision, a strange anxiety stemming from being a reincarnated soul prevented her from fully integrating into this world. One day, her father introduced her to her fiancé, the young Duke of Blanchard. When she saw the boy who welcomed her politely, she wondered to herself if this was truly her fiancé. She answered shyly that she looked forward to it too, thinking how much he looked like a prince straight out of a storybook. That was the first day she met Shane, and initially she worried about her ability to maintain an engagement with a child. But whether it was because of Shane's early maturity or because she had already adapted to living as a child, her fears vanished. They were always together, spending days filled with joy. And thanks to that, she was able to fully adapt to this world. Adeline confides in Shane her desire to one day travel throughout the Empire. She adds that her family worries about her too much and whispers to him that she had been secretly saving some money to achieve this dream. At that moment, she notices that Shane's expression changed to a vacant look, a look that came over him from time to time. This made her wonder if there was something he was hiding from her. As much as he helped her fully adapt to this world as a reincarnated soul, she also wanted to make him happy. The scene shifts to the funeral of Shane's mother, where Adeline overheard whispers from some attendees talking about how his behavior did not reflect that of a child. They went on to say that the Duchess was not close to him during her life, perhaps because she didn't bond with him as he wasn't a lovable child. At that moment, she realized the meaning of the expression that sometimes appeared on his face. He was enduring all these harsh words alone and in silence, and she thought that no matter how mature he seemed, he was still just a child. He stood silently by his mother's coffin. Then, she couldn't help herself. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, which surprised him, making him call out her name. As she held him, her tears flowed, and she asked him why he couldn't even cry freely when he was still a child. Shane asked her in surprise what she was saying all of a sudden. She told him that even at a time like this, he shouldn't pretend to be an adult and that it was okay to cry. Shane tried to calm her down, insisting he was perfectly fine while her eyes were still flooded with tears. To prove his words to her, he flashed a smile. She reacted playfully, protesting how he could be the one comforting her in this situation. Then she returned to hug him again, assuring him that she would stay by his side. She knew that in times of deep sorrow, people might lie to themselves and claim they are fine, but that doesn't mean they truly are. So she asked him that they stay together and not choose isolation. He agreed to her request, thanking her, and hugged her in return. Since that day, they became a support for each other, and she believed only happy days awaited them until that incident happened. Around the age of 9, she happened to read a single line in a newspaper article that changed her life completely. The article spoke of a saint appearing once every 100 years, and as the end of the 100 years approached without a new saint appearing, and to calm the citizens' anxiety, the next saint was titled the Savior of the Empire. She was shocked upon reading these phrases, as she realized she had definitely read this story in a novel during her previous life. Thus, she realized that she had actually been transported into the world of a novel, and that the saint she thought was just a legend was actually a real person. She remembered that the novel was a romance story about a saint who purifies the venom of demonic beasts, and a duke who serves as her guardian. But the problem was, the article mentioned Shane Blanchard by name as a candidate to assist the saint due to his extraordinary talent. Then she realized that the main hero of this novel was none other than her fiancé, Shane Blanchard, and that she, as the hero's fiancé, was destined to be jealous of the hero's relationship and commit all sorts of evil deeds. Ultimately, she would meet her end as the worst villainess. Not only that, but there was another shocking fact: the awakening of the saint. In this fantasy world, there are demonic beasts, and as befits a romance novel, the female lead, the saint, is the only one capable of purifying their venom and saving humanity. But the horrifying truth was that the catalyst for her awakening was the death of the villainess, Adeline. After awakening as a saint, the heroine unleashes her power. In the end, she prevents the destruction of the world and reaches a happy ending. In other words, the story concludes with her death, the villainess. Shane was talking to the dazed Adeline, asking her what she was thinking about all of a sudden, then suggesting they go for a walk after lunch to show her the flowers blooming in the garden. But she remained silent, staring at the newspaper in her hands with a shocked look, prompting him to call her name again. Later that night, Shane finally found her and asked if he had done something wrong, but she replied that she couldn't understand. She suddenly asked him to break the engagement, leaving him in confusion and anxiety outside her room door while she sat alone inside. Crying under her covers, she whispered an apology to Shane, justifying to herself that she had no other choice. She remembered how she asked him to leave, apologizing to him. She even asked him not to be kind to her anymore, leaving him in a state of shock and pain. After realizing she was reincarnated in this world, she asked him to break their engagement in an attempt to slightly twist the original story. Her plan was that if she abandoned him, the time he would meet the main heroine would come much faster, and through this process, they might find another way to awaken the saint other than her death. Although she knew the engagement wouldn't truly be broken because it was a matter for the adults, she planned to slowly distance herself from him, apologizing to him in her heart for the pain she caused, and convincing herself he would forget her soon. He is the hero destined for a happy ending, and she was determined to protect everyone and avoid her death. But she discovered that this novel was harsher than she imagined. In one of her nightmares, she saw someone approaching her bed while she was sleeping, and she woke up to the sound of footsteps. Suddenly, a young man with red eyes appeared carrying a dagger and stabbed her, and she let out a loud scream. She woke up from her sleep terrified, realizing that what happened was just a dream. She wondered as she sat in her bed about how many days had passed while she suffered from these nightmares. Since she announced her desire to separate, nightmares continued to haunt her. In one dream, she finally succeeded in breaking the engagement but ended up poisoned. In another dream, she tried to become a follower of the heroine, but she was also assassinated. In a dream where she finally fled to a convent, she died in an accident. In the dream she just saw, her second older brother went on a business trip to the kingdom of Tehet and brought back a servant. She was killed by that servant, only to discover that the common denominator in all these nightmares is that they always end in her death. The next morning, she was absent-minded at the dining table, thinking about the absurdity of her dreams. A sudden business trip for her underage brother seemed completely illogical to her. Her mother noticed the paleness of her face and asked if she was okay, and she replied that she hadn't slept well. Her mother remarked that she was probably sad because her second brother would go on a long trip, and Adeline felt a chill run through her body. She asked her mother in shock where he was going, and she replied it was the kingdom of Tehet, where he intended to start a business. Then she realized that the kingdom of Tehet was the same place her brother brought that servant from in her dream, and she wondered if what she saw was a prophetic dream. As if to confirm her intuition, her dreams became reality from that day. When she dreamed of her eldest brother's return to the palace, he left for it the next day. When she dreamed of her mother's illness, she actually fell ill, and she felt as if someone was predicting her death and mocking her. Adeline realized that her fate in this world differed from other reincarnation novels. Instead of making her own destiny, she had to die, or else this world would eventually perish. Initially, she met this fate with a cynical laugh, wondering how much this world wanted her dead. But soon a sense of challenge took hold of her, and she decided that if death was inevitable, she might fake it too, deceive fate itself. From that moment, she began preparing for her death with extreme precision, calculating the timing and possible ways to fake it, and based on her knowledge of the original story, she gathered loyal and competent followers. Her plan relied on the fact that the heroine awakens as a saint through her guilt for not being able to prevent her death, so she had to execute her plan on the same day Genevieve is attacked, exactly as mentioned in the novel. While preparing the plan, she continued to keep Shane at a distance, assuring him that although the adults would not allow them to break the engagement, she did not intend to marry him. Years passed quickly, and after a few years, the saint appeared as expected. By that time, all preparations to fake her death were finally complete. On the promised day, a scream rang out through the palace while someone called out for the young duke. Lady Adeline was severely injured while trying to protect the saint, and she fell into the arms of Genevieve, who was begging her to open her eyes. An enraged Shane ordered a healer to be brought immediately. Meanwhile, Adeline was thinking that the pain was worse than she expected and that her whole body was tearing apart, while Genevieve was still pleading with her not to close her eyes. Shane knelt beside her, and she called his name in a weak voice, and he answered that he was here. Before she departed, she touched his face, apologizing for deceiving him and everyone. She told him she would pay the price for hurting him and asked him to forget her and live happily. Then she uttered her final word, goodbye, and her hand fell lifeless. Shane collapsed, screaming her name in a state of shock and grief. Adeline felt guilty towards Shane and her family, but she had no other choice. That was the only way to save herself and everyone, and thus she succeeded in faking her death and leaving. Elsewhere, Shane was remembering her previous words when she asked him not to be sad if something bad happened. He remembered her promise that she would make him happy, and he wondered bitterly why she abandoned him after all those promises. 5 years after that incident, Adeline was finally reading a newspaper article, announcing that her long wait had paid off. The article announced the wedding of the century, confirming that Shane and Genevieve had married just like in the original story. Other articles covered the story of the saint's rise from the common people and how her awakening went smoothly, wondering if love was the secret of her growing holy power. Thus, she considered her plan essentially successful. She had succeeded in preparing a potion that made her appear dead and carved a way to escape from inside the coffin. She took advantage of loopholes in noble funerals, but she admitted that all of this wouldn't have been possible without the help of Lloyd, who had been with her since childhood, and also Lucian, the leader of the underworld. The only strange thing was the silence of the Blanchard family, and she wondered if that meant she had been forgotten so quickly. She looked at Shane's picture in the newspaper, noticing that he hadn't changed at all. She saw him standing next to Genevieve and felt satisfied because they looked wonderful together, and it made her happy that he was happy. She decided to stop the emotions, realizing that all that remained for her was to wait for the capture of the final villain in the story. And since there was still some time, she felt a moment of calm. As Adeline turned the pages of the newspaper, she decided she must focus on saving more money for her future. But her calm did not last long. It was interrupted by the entry of her loyal servant, Lloyd, rushing in and calling her "my lady." She asked him in surprise why he was running like that, as it was not his habit to appear so agitated. He told her in a voice heavy with sorrow that he had just received news from one of their acquaintances in the capital stating that her mother had died. Adeline couldn't believe the news, whispering to herself that he was lying, while a happy memory she shared with her parents flashed before her, wondering how this tragic thing could happen. Tears flooded her face as she whispered her mother's name, realizing that this painful fate was never what she wanted when she left and left everything behind. In a firm tone, she told Lloyd of her decision to return to her hometown. She wanted to say goodbye to her mother for the last time, no matter the cost. On the way, Lloyd expressed his concern, explaining that if they left now, they would likely wait a long time to attend the funeral, and asked her if she was sure she was ready for this risk. But she insisted it was best to go immediately, as she could not allow anyone to discover that she was still alive. Lloyd understood her position and promised her he would stay on standby nearby, giving her enough time to say goodbye to her mother. So she thanked him for his understanding and loyalty. Upon arriving at the cemetery, she felt relieved that she managed to come before the funeral ceremony began, and resolved to say goodbye to her mother and leave as quickly as possible. As she was walking, she heard a voice behind her telling her that he had finally found her. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed her hands, and she turned in shock to find herself face to face with Shane. He looked at her with a strange calm and said, "It hasn't been long, Adeline." She was stunned, wondering to herself about the impossibility of him being here. And at that moment, she began to smell a strange scent. As her consciousness was fading, she heard his voice revealing the horrifying truth. He knew she would fall into the trap of a fake obituary, and that if he had known how easy it was, he would have sent one sooner. She lost consciousness completely and fell into his arms. Shane carried her in his arms, whispering to her to sleep well, my beautiful fiancée, assuring her they would be together when she woke up. In her coma, her memory took her back to a scene from their childhood, where Shane was asking her what she was thinking about so deeply. She remembered that it was a memory from their childhood days together. In that memory, she was asking young Shane sadly why everyone must die, and whether they could stay together forever. Then he made a promise to himself that he would live forever and never die, and that he would stay by her side forever. She returned to consciousness for a moment, rejecting that memory. And this promise that had now taken a dark turn, she woke up wondering where she was. She tried to gather her thoughts, remembering that she definitely met Shane at the funeral, but what happened after that was blurry. Then she remembered his words clearly when he described the obituary as fake, and she began to wonder what was actually happening. At that moment, the creaking of the door being opened was heard. A woman entered who was none other than Genevieve, the saint and the original heroine of the novel, who called her Lady Adeline. Shock hit Adeline as she wondered in confusion and amazement why Genevieve was here. Genevieve was the heroine of this world, the good girl who never lost her warm heart despite the harsh circumstances and cruel abuses she faced. As soon as she saw Adeline awake, she rushed toward her and hugged her tightly, whispering in disbelief that she was truly alive. She told her she could hardly believe it even when the Duke Shane told her so, as the moment of her death before her eyes was still vivid in her memory. Yet here she was now alive, which made tears well up in Genevieve's eyes with joy. Genevieve gently reproached her, saying that if she were alive, she could have at least contacted her. So Adeline found nothing to say but to apologize for deceiving her. Then she asked her how she got to this place, which did not look like the Duke's residence, and Genevieve replied that the Duke was the one who brought her. Adeline realized that her suspicions were correct, and that Shane was the one who orchestrated the saint's presence here, and she wondered how he managed to find her, and felt an urgent need to leave before more people discovered her. She asked Genevieve to tell her what was happening and to help her get out, but the saint apologized, justifying her refusal by saying the Duke would be very angry if she did that. In a desperate attempt, Adeline pointed out that Shane is her husband, and that he would surely listen to a request from his wife. Confusion was clear on Genevieve upon hearing the word husband, which sparked Adeline's bewilderment. Genevieve soon realized that Adeline must have thought so because of the wedding article that was published, but she was surprised by her reaction. Adeline clung to hope and asked her directly to confirm the matter, reminding her of the wedding article. Genevieve replied that she had indeed married, making Adeline believe her plan might work. But Genevieve followed her words with a resounding shock, explaining that her husband is not Duke Blanchard. Adeline did not grasp what she heard, so she asked her what her words meant, insisting that the article mentioned it clearly. Genevieve explained that the newspaper was deceptive, although the article was phrased to look at first glance like she married the Duke, it did not explicitly mention that anywhere. Adeline could not believe this could happen. At that moment, she remembered Shane's previous words about her falling into the fake obituary trap. The picture began to clear in her mind. It meant that her mother's obituary and the wedding article that seemed to bring Genevieve and Shane together were all part of Shane's plan to lure her and bring her out of hiding. Genevieve continued her talk, explaining that her husband is a knight in the Crown Prince's guard, a man with no land or title, not Duke Blanchard. Adeline wondered in shock what Shane was trying to do with all this. Then Genevieve revealed that the Duke had somehow learned that Adeline was still alive, and that he convinced her to cooperate with him in this plan, promising her that if she did, Adeline would surely return. She admitted she was worried until the moment the article was published that she might have made a grave mistake, but she never imagined that Adeline would actually return. After revealing everything, Genevieve asked Adeline to answer her question, which was why she disappeared 5 years ago. Adeline found herself speechless. How could she tell her that this world is actually a novel, and that she is the villainess destined to die after trying to hurt her? And how could she say to her that her death was necessary to awaken her powers as a saint? Genevieve noticed her silence and said with a calm smile that she expected she wouldn't tell her easily. Adeline found nothing to say but to apologize to Genevieve again. Genevieve explained that she could not help her escape directly, for if she did, the Duke would not show mercy to her or her husband. However, she promised she would try to ask for the Crown Prince's help so that Adeline could at least leave this room. Adeline was touched by Genevieve's kindness and realized that if the saint was speaking in such a panicked way, then Shane must have completely lost his mind. So she thanked her for her willingness to help. Genevieve asked her if she would one day tell her the real reason for her departure 5 years ago. Adeline was unable to answer clearly, as she realized the story no longer followed the original novel's path, and that no one knew what might happen to her life now, and all she hoped for was to be able to tell everyone the truth to finally rest. But she couldn't, as she saw in one of her prophetic dreams that everyone would be in danger if she did that. So she promised Genevieve she would try to tell her after everything ended. Genevieve smiled and said she would wait, adding that the person who wants to hear the truth more than anyone else is someone other than her. Meanwhile, Shane was standing in his office inside his residence, lost in thought as he thought about Adeline. She seemed thinner to him than he remembered after seeing her again 5 years after the separation. He remembered the scene of her death while she was stained with blood in his arms, and he thought that if she had made a decision like that to leave his side, she should have at least lived a good life. But he soon shook these feelings from his head, considering them now meaningless. He had resolved that she would never be able to leave him again, and that if she had to blame someone, she should blame the fate that brought them together. His memory took him back to their first meeting in the year he turned 10, when she shyly asked him if he was her fiancé. At that time, she was to him nothing more than Lady Bertrand, the child who became his fiancé. Their engagement was a purely political arrangement, as the Bertrand family was a wealthy and influential family that owned fertile lands and was active in commercial projects. For this reason, the imperial family sought to establish direct relations with them, but after their repeated rejections, they turned to an alternative solution, which was marrying him, as the son of the imperial princess, to the daughter of the Bertrand family. Initially, it was not important to either of them. It was just a formal connection. He remembers telling her that he looked forward to working with her, but this was what he thought before he truly knew Adeline. Adeline had a somewhat strange side. After answering easily about difficult topics, she would quickly pretend she knew nothing again, and she often stole glances at his face insolently while pretending to look elsewhere. But that was all. For him, who found everything in the world boring because he possessed different abilities from others, she was just someone who caught his attention a little. At that time, regardless of who was with him, it was no different from being alone. Everything seemed very boring to him. Perhaps for this reason, his mother used to scream at others not to bring that child before her, considering his blue eyes staring at her disgusting. His mother wondered how she could feel affection for a child who never looked like children, so much so that she found him himself unsettling. Her words didn't particularly hurt him, as adults could not hide their annoyance at a child who didn't act like children, and as proof of that, he himself didn't feel any sadness at his mother's death. Yes, that was certainly the case, until Adeline approached him at the funeral and asked him to stay together and not choose isolation. The moment he hugged Adeline, who was comforting him at the funeral, her warmth was intense, so much so that he almost wished he were truly sad instead. From that moment, the fiancé he thought could be anyone turned into someone he was grateful was Adeline. Shane realized how wonderful it was. Thanks to Adeline, life was no longer as boring as before. He never imagined he would feel this way about anyone. Things that wouldn't have meant anything if they were from someone else became specially meaningful just because they were her. He loved the sight of falling snow only because she saw it as beautiful. He remembers how he held her hand and promised her he would not hand her over to anyone else, for she was the only color in his world. But fate went in the exact opposite direction of his desires. Adeline announced their desire to break the engagement. Although he begged her to tell him what he had done wrong, she contented herself with an apology without providing any explanation. He tried to prevent her from leaving, but she insisted on moving away. Fortunately, the engagement wasn't truly broken because it was an arrangement from the imperial family, but Adeline continued to avoid him. She even advised him to be honest with his feelings and win the heart of the one he loves when she appears, as if that girl would not be her. Whenever he saw her acting as if she knew his entire future, he felt anxious. He felt as if his insides were rotting from pain, but he forced himself to appear calm, waiting for the day she would return and look at him again. But what returned to him was nothing but her hollow death, so he screamed her name in indescribable agony. He remembered her final words apologizing to him and asking him not to remain alone. She asked him to forget her and live happily, ignoring her previous promise to stay by his side. She was his only color, his only emotion, and his only love. On the day she died, his world shattered into pieces. Thus, he lived days like an empty shell after his soul died, until one day he received a letter from the Crown Prince carrying urgent news concerning the servant Adeline kept by her side. The letter revealed that while investigating the illegal distribution of monster derivatives, they discovered that the leader of that network, Lucian Cole, was frequently meeting Adeline's servant, and that he had been frequenting his residence for the past 6 years as if it were his home. Shane knew that Lucian was a person who could fabricate any kind of information, so it seemed strange that Adeline would deliberately deal with someone like him. Through the Crown Prince's letter, one possibility began to take shape in his mind. Perhaps Adeline's death was nothing more than a play. Finally, he learned the truth through one of his subordinates who confirmed that the young lady met Lucian Cole the day before the incident. The despair and sense of betrayal he felt when he realized her death was a lie were shockingly massive. But at the same time, feelings of joy and ecstasy overwhelmed him as he imagined the moment he would finally find her. He didn't know why she tried so hard to leave him, but he decided he would think about that after she was completely by his side once again. Several days passed since Genevieve's visit, and in the meantime, Adeline tried to escape. But since the room was on a high floor, and all she could see from the window was a dense forest, she had no choice but to give up. She lay on her bed lamenting her miserable life, wondering what Shane was trying to do, and about the thoughts running through her former fiancé's head. She hadn't seen Shane since that day, so she hadn't even had the chance to ask him directly. While she was lost in her thoughts, she heard a voice coming from behind the door, a voice she recognized immediately. Adeline couldn't believe what she saw. Her mother, Marchioness Emma Bertrand, was standing before her with tears filling her eyes. Only moments passed before the mother rushed toward her daughter, hugging her tightly, disbelieving that she had finally returned to her. Adeline felt relief while in her mother's arms, as she confirmed that the news of her death was indeed a trick orchestrated by Shane, but she wondered in confusion why he brought her mother to this place. This emotional meeting was interrupted by her father's voice, who entered the room asking his wife to calm down. Soon a bigger surprise followed. Her two brothers, Patrick the elder and Jeff the younger, appeared, and Adeline suddenly found herself surrounded by her entire family. But her brothers were more cautious. Patrick asked his mother to step back, admitting he didn't fully trust Duke Blanchard's words. As for Jeff, he looked at the situation sarcastically, commenting that they had surely found a woman who looked very much like his sister. In the midst of these mixed emotions, Duke Shane entered with Genevieve, which surprised Adeline to see the saint there. Patrick faced the Duke angrily, refusing to believe that this was his sister whom he had placed in her coffin with his own hands. Shane replied to him calmly, revealing an amazing narrative that Adeline in the coffin was not dead, but was in a state of apparent death, and that this was the most the saint's power could do at that time. He continued, affirming that Adeline never died, and that the saint's power protected her at the moment of the attack. So they took her secretly during the mourning period and spent the next 5 years helping the saint revive her. Genevieve warmly supported the story, stating that the gods had finally answered their prayers of 5 years, declaring that sacrificing 5 years of her time was nothing for her savior, Lady Adeline. Adeline was stunned listening to this elaborate play, thinking that Shane and Genevieve were bigger fraudsters than her, especially with the saint's participation in this lie. Her father asked Shane why he hadn't said anything from the beginning, reminding him how he had placed the full blame for Adeline's death on him and didn't give him a chance to speak. Shane explained that he wasn't sure if this method would succeed, so he preferred to wait until he was sure of its success before telling them the truth. Then her father realized why the Duke had not officially broken the engagement throughout that period. Then Shane directed his words to her father, assuring him that he had never thought of any woman other than Adeline. Since she had now returned thanks to the gods, he announced his intention to proceed with their wedding procedures as soon as possible. Adeline was shocked by this announcement and wished someone would object, but she looked around to find that her family was in such a state of shock that Shane's words had not reached their ears yet. They were all so stunned that they hadn't grasped what was just said. Although Jeff tried to doubt again, his father silenced him, saying they couldn't doubt the Duke's words when he spoke with such conviction. Then the father turned to Adeline and apologized deeply, admitting that the joy of a long-awaited wish coming true made it hard to believe at first. He expressed his immense happiness at her return to them. Adeline looked at her family's faces and thought that she only stayed away from them to survive, believing they would be fine without her. But seeing them in this state, completely unprepared to lose her, made it impossible for her to turn her back on them now, and she admitted in her heart that she missed them too. At the Bertrand family residence, Adeline felt relieved to be out of that room, but she realized she had returned to her home anyway, where her parents assured her they would take care of everything and set matters right. Her brothers advised her not to do anything reckless again and to get some rest because she must be confused. She agreed with their words and left the room quietly. After lying down in her room, a strange feeling possessed her that something was not right. In her memory, her family never acted this way. Her parents and brothers, as a genuine villainous family, were supposed to be cold, isolated, and completely selfish. So She wondered in confusion about the reason for this sudden tenderness they were showering her with. Even though she had finally returned, something didn't make sense at all. Her thinking did not last long. She was surprised by the appearance of her loyal servant, Lloyd, so she called his name, inquiring where he had been all this time. Lloyd explained that he was wearing a hooded cloak and monitoring the situation near the palace where she was held, and that he followed her as soon as he saw her move to her family's house. Adeline told him she was worried Shane had hurt him, and felt relieved that he was fine, although she expected him to succeed in escaping anyway. Lloyd asked her directly what happened, surprised that the Duke did not marry the saint as expected. Signs of distress appeared on Adeline as she thought about how things had become more complicated. It was hard for her to turn her back on her family the first time, and now she didn't know what she ought to do after returning to them. While she was lost in her despair, Lloyd advised her to sleep in her bed, but she refused, justifying it with her fear that another nightmare would haunt her if she drifted off now. Lloyd urged her not to give up, emphasizing the need for her to get some rest to regain her strength, so she realized in her heart that he was right. She resolved that she could not give up, even if it meant hurting her family or making her fiancé hate her. She had already made her decision that she would do her best to stay alive in this world no matter the cost. With these thoughts, she finally succumbed to sleep. The next day, news spread like wildfire through the newspapers, announcing the return of the Bertrand family's daughter to life after 5 years, thanks to a miracle from the saint. In press interviews, Genevieve stated that Lady Adeline was like a sister to her, and that she wanted to repay her kindness at any cost. She added that she did not hesitate to sacrifice her life for her savior, and that she couldn't feel greater happiness than returning light to her life, which made Adeline realize with shock that the news of her resurrection had been broadcast to the entire world. With the newspapers circulating the news of the romance of the century, and Duke Blanchard announcing that the Marquis's daughter is the only woman for him, Adeline realized that all these arrangements were part of Shane's elaborate plan that he devised while detaining her, and that escape now had become almost impossible with all eyes focused on her. She looked at Shane, who appeared before her with a provocative smile, and thought sarcastically that he is the real fraud in this story. But he approached her calmly, reproaching her for her harshness in speaking with her fiancé. When she demanded he leave because this was her home, he answered coldly that he could not leave before finishing the tea his dear mother-in-law had prepared for him. Adeline felt defeated. Shane's daily visits mocked her resolve to escape, and with her family's complicity with the one blackmailing her, she realized that her leaving that room changed nothing. The entire world had turned into a prison, and her family were the jailers, and while she was in this state, she was waiting for a visit from another person whose desire to see was no less than her desire to see Shane. Suddenly, a handsome young man with silver hair entered, commenting that she was truly alive. He was introduced as Edwin, the Crown Prince of the Green Windsor Empire. At that moment, Adeline remembered a horrifying fact from the original novel. Her character was not just a simple villainess, but was destined to be killed by one of the men who loved the heroine, as a price for her evil deeds. This means that the main suspects in her future murder are the candidates for the hero's role in the original story. Alongside Shane, there were 3 others: a magician who controls monsters, a gang leader in the underworld, and the crown prince who schemes from the peak of power. The scene returned to the present, where Edwin noticed she didn't seem surprised at all, but he assured her he was actually quite shocked. So he asked her for the reason that drove her to orchestrate such a plan. Adeline whispered to herself that she initially suspected Edwin was the one who killed her, and commented on his strange curiosity about unusual matters, and he asked her if she had committed a horrible crime. Then he added with a meaningful look as he glanced at Shane sitting in the room, that whatever crime she had committed, she had someone who possessed power exceeding that of her family ready to cover it up. Adeline thought that despite his gentle and meek appearance, his personality was completely corrupt. Then he urged her to answer his question. Adeline immediately denied it, but he insisted on knowing the truth. In her heart, she knew she fled because she was going to be killed, but she could not speak of it. She remembered she had tried to reveal the truth once, ready for everyone to treat her as a madwoman, but she saw a horrific nightmare in which the person she told died a gruesome death. For this reason, she decided to keep her lips sealed no matter what the truth was. Edwin seemed to understand, telling her he would listen to the rest of the story later, but he moved on to the reason for his visit, which was to discuss her marriage to Duke Blanchard. Then, Shane intervened, affirming that they would hold their wedding ceremony as soon as possible. Edwin wondered about the marriage, and Shane replied that he was merely informing him, reminding him that His Majesty the King had granted his approval for their engagement long ago. With a sharp look, Edwin wondered if Adeline had an opinion on this decision. Adeline flared with anger, asserting to them that she had never agreed to this, which Edwin realized immediately, concluding they had not discussed the matter at all. Edwin smiled and announced his approval, saying they could do as they pleased, as he realized he wouldn't be able to stop them even if he tried. and that this matter would stir up a commotion in the empire for some time. Then he prepared to leave, and before he departed, he kissed her hand, saying he welcomed her back. Adeline felt no sincerity in his words, but he assured her he meant what he said, explaining frankly that it had become difficult to deal with Shane in her absence, as he wavered between violent fits of rage and a sense of void. He added that Shane seemed ready to burn the entire empire and offer it as a sacrifice if it meant saving her. Then he revealed another reason for his happiness, expressing his hope, as the crown prince, to one day borrow her skills with which she deceived the whole world. After his departure, preparations were made for the stage that would witness her grand return, which would be at the church's evening charity gala, an event designed for her to appear before the public before the wedding, alongside the saint, the crown prince, and Shane. The scene moved to her preparations, where the seamstress was taking her measurements, confirming that due to the tight schedule, they would begin production immediately. Adeline apologized to the seamstress, named Rachel, for this haste, especially with her many clients. But she replied laughing that she could not ignore a request from Jeff. Rachel was the owner of the famous boutique Madame Harper, known for being somewhat arrogant because her clients were all high-profile figures. But it turned out she was an old business partner of her second brother, who had apparently agreed to personally handle her wardrobe. Adeline was surprised to learn that her brother was Rachel's largest investor, as she thought he was running a small business during his travels. Then she asked if there was anything else that needed preparation. At that moment, her mother intervened, saying there were many things to be done, explaining that she had kept her old clothes, but they had become old-fashioned and that they needed to buy everything new. Jeff tried to calm her, affirming they had chosen the most important pieces and could prepare the rest slowly. After all, they had plenty of time now. Her mother agreed with tears in her eyes, while Adeline felt that this situation was almost driving her crazy. Jeff agreed that there was no need to rush at all. Then he turned to Adeline and asked her with a meaningful smile if she agreed with him. Adeline realized there was something suspicious in his gaze, and that her brother did not fully trust her yet, but she thought that if she used this to her advantage, she might find another opportunity to escape. When her feet stepped into the gala hall, a state of wonder and whispering prevailed among the attendees, who wondered if their eyes were deceiving them. They could not believe that the one who just entered, accompanied by her family, was Adeline Bertrand. Adeline stood in her elegant appearance, while astonishment gripped the attendees who were aware of her death 5 years ago, wondering how this impossible thing had happened. As she expected, all eyes were on her, and she felt relieved that Shane was not with her, realizing that if he were here, he wouldn't have let those whispers pass unpunished. For the first time, she felt grateful for her brother's presence by her side in such a situation. Her brother teased her by asking if she preferred him over her fiancé, which she denied in confusion. Then he commented with regret that Shane was not there to witness this scene, but she asked him to stop talking about him, admitting in her heart that being with her brother was better than being with Shane. Adeline realized that trying to escape secretly behind Shane's back would be difficult under these circumstances, as everyone's focus was on the fact of her return from the dead, and her family still did not fully trust her. Any reckless action would expose her plan immediately. Therefore, she decided she must find a new approach, and at that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling her name. Genevieve took the initiative to welcome her, expressing her happiness at her safe return. So Adeline pointed out she had heard that the saint was the one who got her out of that place, and jokingly asked if she should call her Saint instead of her name. But Genevieve insisted there was no need for that, as everyone already knew Adeline was her savior, a title Adeline did not favor. Genevieve apologized for not visiting due to her sudden busyness, so Adeline reassured her there was no need to apologize. But she thought that the person who ought to apologize to her was someone else. At that moment, Crown Prince Edwin suddenly appeared, wondering with a smile if she was talking about him. Her brother Jeff stepped forward to greet the Crown Prince, who welcomed him in turn. Then Jeff asked them to continue their conversation while he went to get a drink. Edwin noticed that the future bride looked tired instead of happy about her upcoming wedding, and she did not seem pleased to see him, which she considered natural. Adeline confronted him, saying she understood his inability to stop her marriage, but she reproached him for not taking proper care of Genevieve, as the saint looked as though she was working herself to death, which affected Genevieve deeply. Adeline knew through Lloyd's investigations that Genevieve was bearing a massive workload alone. In addition to subduing beasts, she went on frequent expeditions to purify the pollution from their corpses, as well as attending imperial and ecclesiastical events. Adeline wondered how the talented Genevieve could find no time to rest, but the saint tried to reassure her that she possessed a self-healing ability and was fine. Edwin intervened with a cunning smile, explaining that if Adeline hadn't faked her death to protect Genevieve, Shane wouldn't have piled work on her as a form of revenge, admitting that her logic was not entirely wrong. Adeline was surprised by this talk, and she thought she hadn't expected things to turn out this way. Originally, they were supposed to have defeated the final villain, the Dark Mage, and reached the happy ending by this time. But according to the information she obtained from Lloyd, the Dark Mage had completely disappeared after the attack that took place 5 years ago, unlike the original story where he was supposed to continue attacking Genevieve until his final defeat. So she wondered if things had gone wrong because she hadn't actually died as in the novel. Then she wondered if that meant her life was still in danger. But she was certain of one thing, as long as that Dark Mage was not eliminated, this world would not be able to reach a happy ending. This meant she must catch him as soon as possible, but the only information she had was that he was one of the Empire's nobles. She realized that if she wanted to access information regarding him without raising suspicion, her only option was to move forward with the marriage to Shane as planned, while Edwin watched her, thinking she was planning to escape again, and suggested to Genevieve that they go greet her mother. Genevieve told Adeline she would be back soon, and Adeline bid her farewell in turn. With her brothers and Genevieve moving away from her, Adeline saw that this was her chance. She decided to first search for any clues regarding the Dark Mage inside the gala hall, realizing that the smallest thread might help her in the future. During her search, she was interrupted by the voice of a young man rudely questioning if she was truly Adeline Bertrand. Then he accused her of being merely a look-alike imposter, so Adeline felt resentful that someone started picking a fight with her before she had even begun her investigations. She calmly asked him who he was, and he replied sarcastically whether she would even recognize him if he told her. So she smelled the scent of alcohol coming from him and realized he was drunk. She pointed out that he seemed intoxicated, expressing her surprise at alcohol being served at a church event. But she noticed everyone was looking in their direction and realized they were hungry to question the identity of someone supposedly back from the dead. The young man continued to harass her, accusing her of being an imposter impersonating a dead woman, and offered to give her some of his drink to calm her nerves, which must be tense because of this trick. Adeline sighed, explaining that the saint, her family, and even the crown prince had recognized her, and asked him if she had to prove to him as well that she was Adeline Bertrand. He answered defiantly that she must if she could, expressing his confidence that she wouldn't be able to. So she realized if this situation dragged on, she would attract more attention, and decided that although it was annoying, she had no choice but to deal with it. She agreed with his words, admitting that someone who was in a coma for 5 years is essentially a corpse, and the idea of resurrection does not seem logical. The young man was surprised by her agreement with him, so she continued, explaining that what he says means a woman who cannot prove her identity must be a fake. Then she followed up that Duke Blanchard and Saint Genevieve, who claim this woman is Adeline Bertrand, are partners in this conspiracy. The young man became confused and denied saying that, so she added that the crown prince is merely an innocent victim deceived by these imposters. The young man vehemently denied it, but she ignored him, thinking about how confused he was over a simple matter, and that this is what he deserves for causing trouble. Then she continued her talk coldly, explaining that the Bertrand family, unable to accept their daughter's death, fell for this farce like fools, and that the Saint and Blanchard are conspiring together to deceive the entire world, and he alone possesses the sharp insight to expose all this. And unlike the ignorant masses, he can confidently expose this corruption. Then she asked him with a bright smile if this was true. The young man lost his temper and shouted in her face, accusing her of fraud and distorting his words. Adeline thought to herself that she had expected that reaction from him. When words fail him, he resorts to violence. She decided to take the blow to end this situation, then report him to the Emperor later. But before his hand reached her, the young man fell to the ground screaming in pain. Adeline was surprised to find herself in the arms of Shane, who appeared suddenly. She wondered in shock why he was here, as he had told her he was very busy and wouldn't be able to attend. While she was trying to understand what was happening, Shane grabbed her chin and called her name, asking her to explain the situation to him. Meanwhile, in another scene, Jeff was making a deal with Lloyd. Lloyd initially refused, claiming he had nothing to offer, but Jeff accused him of jumping to conclusions before hearing his offer. Jeff was thinking that Lloyd was the boy Adeline had brought home one day and kept by her side ever since. Although he didn't know why she brought him in the first place, he knew that even during the 5 years she was lost, he was the boy who stayed by her side. Then he asked him to listen to him for a moment, explained that he didn't ask him to betray him. Lloyd assured him that his answer would remain the same even if he repeated his request. Jeff explained that he didn't ask him to betray his lady or pry into her secrets. All he wanted was for Lloyd to tell him what his sister wanted, then reminded him that buying information through Lucian costs a lot of money every time. Lucian Cole was the leader of a secret criminal organization that ruled the back alleys, a man who would do anything as long as he was paid, even if it involved a dangerous performance like faking the death of a marquise's daughter. And thanks to him, Adeline was able to safely escape the palace 5 years ago, as he executed every mission precisely, but the price of his work was astronomical. Lloyd couldn't believe Jeff knew all this, and thought that his lady wanted to leave this place, and that while their money is not yet scarce, they need to save their current capital in case of any emergency. Lloyd asked Jeff if he would bear the heavy cost of his information, and Jeff replied, affirming he would pay him double what he paid Lucian. Then he asked him directly why Adeline left them, and told Lloyd that, as he guessed, she would never be free unless they solved the underlying problem. Lloyd remembered the day Adeline saved him until now, when he was lying on the ground injured and broken due to Lucian Cole's test. And since then, he never questioned her orders. Executing them was his only mission. But he knew in his heart that behind that face that always seemed relaxed, there was someone who looked as though they were being chased by something. She was hiding and suffering. For him, his lady was his savior and his only family, and he was ready to do anything for her. Lloyd admitted he didn't know why his lady left this place, but instead, she asked him to look into something. So Jeff asked him about this matter. Lloyd revealed that Adeline asked him to investigate the identity of the person targeting St. Genevieve, and information about the mage who controls the beasts. Jeff wondered about her intention behind this information, but Lloyd admitted he didn't know much either. Jeff thought that despite the pressure from neighboring countries, the saint should be the safest person in Grenwindsor. Then he wondered about the existence of a mage who controls beasts, asking Lloyd if he had ever heard of such a thing. Jeff replied that it was impossible. Beasts are impurities of natural mana, and although they may seem intelligent, they are closer to a phenomenon mimicking the instincts of a living creature. He added that even with black magic, it might work on humans, but controlling a beast is a phenomenon in itself. If it were true, then this mage is no longer in the human world, but is on the level of gods. Jeff decided he would look into this deeply himself first, and then tell him the results, and asked him to stay on standby until then, and Lloyd agreed. Then Lloyd added that Adeline also asked him to investigate the saint's husband. When Jeff asked him why, Lloyd replied that she said she would force them to divorce if he were a stranger, making Jeff think sarcastically whether she thought the saint was her daughter. Lloyd sighed because he leaked his lady's orders behind her back and thought he would have told her Jeff called him a mouse, but now he couldn't. So Jeff reassured him that cooperating with them is for his lady's benefit. They only want to protect their younger sister. Lloyd told Jeff that the thing standing in the way of that is Shane Blanchard. Currently, Jeff considered Shane an ally. At least their goals were similar, which is not losing Adeline again. Currently, there is no one better than Shane to keep Adeline close, affirming that the Bertrand family will not make the same mistake twice. Elsewhere, Genevieve was preparing to go to bed. Genevieve was thinking she had no desire to return, for there was no one waiting for her, even if she did. This feeling of loneliness was not born of the moment. Her husband, the Crown Prince's guardian, practically lived at the imperial palace, while she, as the saint, could not leave the church as she pleased. She admitted to herself that her marriage was not out of love, so living away from her husband was not difficult. She married out of a desire to form a family, but what she regretted was that she still felt a void. She wondered if things would improve if she had a child, but she quickly dismissed the idea. With her busy schedule, pregnancy and childbirth were impossible. Plus, she didn't even know if the gods' blessing would include a child. The gods granted her various abilities as their servant. They enabled her not to feel hunger even if she ate nothing, and to live without sleep. They even granted her the ability to move her body no matter how exhausted she became. But these abilities were, in truth, no different from a curse of forced labor. Indeed, she felt they were closer to a curse given the event that led to the awakening of these powers. She was thinking that Lady Adeline didn't truly realize what she meant to her, for she was the only person in her life who stood by her completely. When she saw her death before her eyes, she felt she would never forgive herself, and that the reason she endured the heavy workload the Duke imposed on her for 5 years was atonement for the death of her savior. While she was lost in her thoughts, her maid reminded her that winter would soon arrive, and that she would depart again on the distant winter purification journey. But Genevieve told her that His Holiness, the Pope, was not well, and that he asked her to stay by his side this winter. Nevertheless, the maid drew her attention to the fact that she would soon be busy overseeing Duke Blanchard's wedding. She commented that the Duke had gone too far by asking the saint to oversee his wedding herself, but Genevieve insisted she would do it, for the Duke and Lady Bertrand are her saviors. Then she wondered with a smile if the maid was hinting that they were lovers, surprised at the source of these rumors, especially since she was already married. She admitted to herself that her heart had indeed fluttered when she stood before him, but that was because of intense fear that made her heart restless. She was tired of these rumors and decided she must have a child quickly so that such talk would disappear. At that moment, an arrow suddenly shot toward her. Her maid screamed in panic, calling the name Saint. shouting at her to get away. 2 weeks after the attack on the saint, and at Green Windsor Grand Cathedral, the entry of the groom Shane Blanchard and the bride Adeline Bertrand was announced. Finally, the promised day had come. As she walked toward the altar, Adeline wished she had at least dated someone during her escape, someone who could have carried her and fled with her from the wedding hall. Genevieve, who was overseeing the ceremony, announced in the name of the gods that they had become husband and wife, wishing them blessing in their future together. But in her heart, Adeline was looking at Genevieve, who seemed happy, and thinking sadly that she was the one who was supposed to be the bride. Her thoughts were interrupted by Shane's voice asking Adeline to lift her head. Then he smiled, saying she must smile, reminding her she is a bride. Adeline confronted Shane with a grim look, wondering how he could expect her to smile in such a forced marriage. But he answered her calmly that if he were in her place, he thought he could smile, which sparked her bewilderment and surprise. Meanwhile, her mother was crying out of extreme happiness, while her son Jeff tried to calm her, reminding her it was a happy day. Whereas Shane was telling Adeline that thanks to this marriage, her loved ones were safe. And he says to her with a deep look, affirming that all this is thanks to her. So her conviction increased that he had truly gone mad. While the attendees were clapping warmly, Shane bowed, thanking her. Then he whispered to her to smile like that, so she tried to move away in confusion. She still didn't understand why Shane insisted on this marriage, but she was certain of one thing: this marriage was never motivated by love. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ignored her refusal and imposed it on her this way, and she concluded that the matter must be revenge against the villainous fiancé who deceived him. But she wondered in confusion, if that were the case, why was he smiling as if he owned the entire world? Before she could grasp the matter, he surprised her with a kiss that made her think that this way, she might begin to think he truly loved her. A few hours later, in the Duke's reception room, Genevieve had overindulged in the celebration wine, expressing how sorry she had been all this time. Adeline looked at her with surprise, thinking that the novel's heroine had turned into a drunkard, so she apologized to her gently. The drunken Genevieve asked her why she did it, so Adeline rushed to her to check on her. And at that moment, Crown Prince Edwin appeared, apologizing for interrupting their first night, and suggesting they consider it a small party, especially since there was no reception anyway. Then Edwin addressed Shane, saying that if he had helped in this strange marriage to this extent, Shane must tolerate his presence. Shane answered calmly that he realized that, and that's why he tolerates him. Adeline expressed her desire to go rest, but explained she couldn't leave before the Crown Prince and the Saint, so Edwin commented that they would have come earlier if the church had allowed them out. Then Edwin revealed that Genevieve had been sensitive lately because of an attack she was subjected to, so Adeline was shocked, wondering about what attack he was talking about, and Edwin replied dismissively whether he hadn't told her. He explained that 2 weeks ago, someone shot an arrow at Genevieve. Adeline asked about the culprit, and Edwin replied that they hadn't caught him yet, and that this was why the Saint snuck out to attend the wedding. Adeline did not grasp the matter. It seemed sudden and illogical to her, and she remembered that Genevieve had told her she had been safe for the past 5 years. Adeline stood up suddenly, expressing her concern for Genevieve, who must have been severely shocked, especially since she heard she returned to work immediately after the attack. So Edwin commented on her bravery. Genevieve told Adeline that what truly bothered her was not the attack, but that Adeline does not take care of herself and only worries about others even after her return. She added, sobbing, that what saddens her is that she wants to protect her too. Adeline tried to apologize, but Genevieve vehemently refused her apology. Instead, she placed in her hand a bracelet she had blessed herself, asking her to take it. She explained that she didn't even want to imagine her in danger, but if she ever was, she should break the bracelet to call her, and promised she would surely come to save her. But suddenly, Genevieve collapsed and fell onto the table, so Adeline called her anxiously, and Edwin commented that she had drunk too much. Adeline looked at the scene thinking she never wanted to keep secrets, for she wished she could one day bless them as they smiled happily and laughed, saying to them, "See, you were happy in the end," and thought how wonderful that would be. But even that simple happiness was not allowed to her, and to escape that horrific nightmare, she was forced to hurt and deceive the people she loved. Adeline believed she had performed her role successfully. Although she didn't die as in the original story, Genevieve had awakened as a saint anyway. But it seems this world did not agree with her. She realized that as long as she, Adeline Bertrand, was alive, Genevieve would face threats she wouldn't have been exposed to if not for her. She wondered in despair what she ought to do, but exhaustion overcame her as she leaned on the table. She woke up after a while, still feeling very sleepy, and thought she needed to wash up, but decided she should at least go sleep in the bedroom. But before she could get up, she was surprised by Shane carrying her in his arms, whispering to her to go back to sleep, so she called his name in surprise. She asked him what happened to the Crown Prince and Genevieve, and he told her he had bid the prince farewell, and that the servants had taken the saint to the guest room. While he was carrying her, she wondered in bewilderment about the reason for this gentle treatment. He was the one who kidnapped her in the first place, and she felt she wouldn't have felt this strange if he had gotten angry with her and cursed her instead. When he placed her on the bed, she asked him to move away, but he answered with a sarcastic smile, wondering what people would think if the groom was kicked out on his first night. Then he hugged her gently, affirming he would only hold her while they slept. He warned her she would fall ill tomorrow if she didn't sleep now, so she felt her head was about to split with pain. In her heart, she admitted she was a little tired. Since her return, her mother had not stopped crying, especially in the last few days when her tears never dried. Even her calm brother Patrick made a fuss, and Jeff kept blaming and nagging her until just before his departure on a distant business trip. Her father also told her how beautiful she was, and that seeing her marry felt like a dream. Everyone wanted to help her, even Genevieve, who was thinking she wanted to repay her. While she was lying in her bed, she thought all this was because of Shane, because he was the one who kept her here, and she felt she couldn't bear the situation unless she thought this way. She looked at him as he slept beside her, and whispered that she hated him deeply, and he replied that he knew that. She continued whispering that she hated him, and he replied that he hated her too, and for that very reason, he would never let her go. The morning after the wedding, Adeline woke up to Lloyd's voice telling her she was awake. She complained of the effects of the late night and asked him what he was doing this early in the morning, and he replied that he had just finished checking the morning staff list. When she went out, the maids welcomed her warmly, so she learned that Lloyd had managed to arrange the hierarchy of servants in just one day, which was not difficult. He explained to her that the former Duke had taken the old employees with him when he left for the province, and only a few servants remained in the palace, which eased the verification process. She wondered if it was about trying to save on wages, but he denied it. He revealed to her that the reason was simply that the Duke rarely returns home, and therefore there is not much to manage. Adeline rejoiced at this news, realizing this meant she could move more freely. She noticed that the atmosphere in Blanchard Palace had truly changed. It previously seemed more luxurious and awe-inspiring, but now it looks clean yet gloomy. While she was walking, she stopped before a portrait of Shane's parents and remembered how she swore in the past she would never become the Duchess no matter what happened. At that time, Blanchard Palace was like an iron fortress filled with thorns. Duke Blanchard was a member of the Senate of Nobles, and the Duchess was a princess by birth. Both were blue-blooded high nobles. As if he inherited their blood, Shane also had an excessively mature side since childhood. Adeline remembered that upon her departure, Shane was still the young Duke and lived with his father, the former Duke. She wondered while looking at their picture when he ended up alone. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lloyd's voice telling her the Duke was waiting inside and informing her he would go see Lucian, but she asked him to have breakfast with her before he left. Lloyd explained he didn't want to encounter Duke Blanchard, believing he likely hates him, so Adeline acknowledged that, thinking that Shane and Lloyd always avoided each other. In fact, it was like a blatant and mutual disregard between them. Then Lloyd wished her a delicious meal, jokingly warning her that he would check later if she had left any vegetables, making her wonder to herself who the real guardian was sometimes. As she headed to the dining room, she felt a strange tension, perhaps because it was the day after the wedding hall, but she tried to calm herself, wondering what could happen. When she entered, she found Shane standing there, and he asked her if she had slept well. She was surprised by his being alone, so he told her that Genevieve had returned while she was sleeping, but she explained that wasn't what she meant. Rather, she was wondering why he was waiting alone without even a servant. So he asked her to sit and told her he would bring her food. When he placed the plate before her, she asked him why he did it himself without calling anyone, and he offered to call them if she wanted, but she refused, saying there was no need. She resolved not to be carried away by Shane's actions, for he would likely do as he pleased anyway, and reminded him that he previously told her he was often away due to being busy and asked him not to worry about her and to make sure he ate his food. But he surprised her by announcing that he would stay home for some time, which shocked her deeply. He asked her sarcastically if it was surprising for someone who just got married to stay in his home, so she answered that wasn't it, but she knows he is busy. She reminded him that the Blanchard Dukes had been members of the Council of Elders for generations, and that his position required him to help manage the country with the crown prince, and that even as newlyweds, he cannot be unemployed. He told her he would simply delete the tasks he doesn't have to do, and that although protocol required his return to the province to greet his father, he would postpone that. In her heart, she urged him to follow protocol as long as he knew it, reminding herself he is a noble. She realized there were many things she needed to discover from now on, foremost among them the identity of the person who attacked Genevieve. Although she wasn't certain yet, she suspected the Dark Mage was the culprit. She remembered that in the original story, he was relentlessly targeting Genevieve's life, and concluded that if he was hiding somewhere, he must be close enough to reach her easily. With many events changing from the original story, she didn't know what might happen, so she decided she must stay by Genevieve's side to protect her. While she was lost in her thoughts, Shane called her name and asked her directly if she was thinking of running away again. Adeline denied it in confusion, admitting in her heart that the idea wasn't far from her mind. Shane reminded her that he didn't intend to let her escape again, and that he would never let her wander alone, calling her "my love." Elsewhere, some nobles were talking about not having seen the Blanchard couple recently, speculating they might be enjoying a passionate honeymoon, but they agreed they should have appeared in society more. The Duchess of Blanchard, the Marquis's daughter, was someone who practically came back from the dead, meaning she would be the focus of everyone's attention wherever she went. They wondered what was happening and expected she might appear at the church to offer prayers. On a rainy day, one of the priestesses wondered if the Duke would come to the church, but the other ruled it out, pointing out he rarely does. The two priestesses were whispering that the saint would lead the prayers starting from that week. So one asked the other sarcastically if she still believed that ridiculous rumor. The other tried to silence her, warning her of her talk, and hinted that the existence of a relationship between the saint and the Duke is the reason for that rumor. But she was interrupted by more exciting news. Her friend revealed she had heard what happened at the last gala, where it was said the Duke almost beat the man who was rude to the Duchess to death. The whispers echoed among the church priests about the scandal following the wedding, the echoes of which subsided shortly after being circulated in the newspapers. And they shared a rumor that Duke Blanchard had intervened to silence the matter. One of the priests reproached his companion for believing the rumors without thinking, while the other seemed completely ignorant of what happened. Meanwhile, Shane was with Adeline, and as if responding to those unheard accusations, calmly affirmed he hadn't killed anyone and hadn't used his influence, which made Adeline think she hadn't even asked him about that. Adeline had received a letter from Genevieve inviting her to attend the first prayer she would lead, so she felt grateful because this invitation gave her a reason to leave the palace in which she might have been held for a long time. Although she felt relieved because the event was held on a regular day with few people present, sparing her from being the focus of everyone's attention, she wished she could have come alone. But Shane, who seemed to read her thoughts, told her that wouldn't happen, which sparked her bewilderment about his strange ability to know what was going on in her mind. Shane had remained at her side, never leaving her since that day he ordered her not to go out, so her life, after marriage, became like house arrest within the palace walls. Nothing fundamental changed in her life except that she became a sharer of the same bed. Though the matter was limited to sleeping in his arms without going beyond that, contrary to what she expected of marital duties. Although this matter was comfortable for her, it increased her bewilderment and made it harder for her to understand what he truly wanted from her. For although his physical proximity to her was gradually increasing, it always stopped at the limit that caused her no discomfort. As is the case now as he encircled her waist with his arm. When she asked him to let her go, asserting she wouldn't run away, he simply refused her request. He claimed he wanted to guide his wife gently, so she mocked in her heart this strange kind of gentleness. He told her this was his special gentleness, and she in turn warned him that this gentleness of his might expose him to accountability if he practiced it with anyone else. But he reassured her that wouldn't happen, because he is only like this with her alone, which confused her, and made her wonder about his skill in exploiting his handsomeness. At the church, a large crowd from all social classes had gathered to attend the first official prayer of Saint Genevieve. This huge gathering sparked the concern of Adeline, who feared someone might exploit this chaos to target Genevieve, so she resolved to stay vigilant. Genevieve, who is nicknamed the living gem of humanity, spends half her year on trips to purify the country, and the other half attending important imperial events. Due to the specialized nature of her role, she rarely participated in church celebrations, so much so that some workers there mockingly gave themselves the title Saint Delivery Crew. Despite the tense atmosphere inside the church, the current pope did not hide his love and admiration for Genevieve, celebrating her virtues publicly as if she were a member of his family. But the truth behind the scenes was much less beautiful. After a long period of people's faith diminishing and the absence of saints, Genevieve's awakening led to a massive flow of donations to the church. Adeline realized that the current pope is a man attracted to greed and influence, and that sharing a powerful and influential symbol like the saint with the imperial throne must be something that irritates him deeply. For this reason, likely, he appointed this large number of guards around her, fearing that some harm might befall her and disrupt these profitable events. However, Adeline could not be complacent. She remembered that an assassin was sent to assassinate Genevieve at a previous royal gala, and although that crisis had passed because of her faking her death, the fact of the existence of a dark mage capable of manipulating humans and beasts alike remains. These dark mages differ completely from ordinary mages or sorcerers who rely on meager mana and herbs, but possess real and dangerous power. Adeline was thinking about the nature of dark mages, a lineage that uses deadly black magic through curses, rituals, and offering blood sacrifices. Because of the brutality of their methods, society considers them outcast evil entities. Yet the power of their spells drives many aristocrats to study their dark arts secretly. She remembered that black magic includes curses and mental manipulation, and that regardless of the mage's identity, Genevieve with her holy light could break the spell if the puppet he is manipulating is caught. This was the main motive behind the dark mage targeting Genevieve in the original story. For although Genevieve had not yet reached her full potential, in the original novel she was capable of purifying curses even without any physical contact, which makes her a major obstacle in the path of any dark mage. Then she remembered a more concerning fact. The person who tried to hurt Genevieve and end her life 5 years ago was also just a puppet subjected to black magic. This means that regardless of how tight the guard is, any innocent person who carries no ill intentions can be used as a tool to attack Genevieve at any moment. Meanwhile, Genevieve appeared suddenly, expressing her surprise and happiness at seeing Adeline there, and reproached her for not telling her she was coming. Adeline replied she was hoping to surprise her, then wondered if she was allowed to be in this place. Genevieve reassured her that everyone there was from the church staff. Then Adeline tried to invite Shane to have lunch with them, but he replied that he was busy. So Adeline immediately denied that she was not busy at all. Adeline enthusiastically suggested that she and Genevieve go to eat together, so Genevieve invited her to her private room. But Shane explained that men entering the Saint's suites is strictly forbidden, so Adeline cunningly suggested that Shane simply have his meal in the public hall. Shane refused this nonsense, affirming that if he weren't allowed to stay with her, they would return to the palace to eat. So Genevieve noticed how close they were to each other, and said this simply wouldn't work. Instead, she reassured Duke Blanchard that she was surrounded by many guards who would ensure Lady Adeline's safety as well. Adeline thought that Genevieve had certainly learned how to use her guards effectively, but she knew that disasters always happen in unexpected moments, so she remained on high alert. Suddenly, a dark-skinned priest rushed toward Genevieve, but Adeline, in a quick reaction, pushed the saint out of his way, making Genevieve call her name in surprise and fear. In a moment, the priest grabbed Adeline by her neck and began to choke her forcefully, and she felt suffocated and unable to catch her breath. The guards hurried to intervene, shouting at the attacker to let her go, while they pulled the shocked Genevieve away from danger, affirming the necessity of moving away. Genevieve screamed in horror as she saw what was happening to her savior. Before anyone realized what happened, a silver flash shot through the air, and the attacking priest fell to the ground screaming in pain after his hand was severed with a single sword stroke. It was Shane who intervened, standing between the attacker and Adeline, who fell to her knees coughing and trying to regain her breath. Immediately, the guards moved and arrested the attacker, announcing that he tried to assault the saint's life and ordered a protection perimeter to be formed around her. Genevieve tried to break free from her guards, insisting she needed to check on Lady Adeline, who was unharmed. Adeline was still on her knees, thinking with relief that Genevieve was not hurt, and that her timely arrival had prevented a disaster. While she was thinking about how relieving it was, she heard Shane's voice calling her name calmly. Shane approached her and asked her in a strange tone whether the idea of escaping from danger ever crossed her mind. Adeline looked at him with weakness apparent on her, and told him she was terrified that Genevieve would be the one hurt, then asked him to help her up due to her feeling of complete exhaustion. Shane exploded with anger, asking sharply whether it was acceptable for her to be hurt as long as the saint was fine, and reproached her for her inability to even resist while being choked, wondering about the madness that drove her to throw herself into the heart of the battle. Adeline found nothing to say but to whisper his name, trying to justify her action, but words failed her. Shane could not control himself, so he pulled Adeline to him and hugged her tightly. While he was holding her, he whispered to himself that the idea of failing to protect her again and losing her once more was nearly driving him to madness. A wave of overwhelming helplessness and rage possessed him. Adeline looked at him, wondering why he was speaking in such a dark manner, especially since he was the one trembling so violently. Then she apologized to him quietly. She then returned the hug, apologizing again for causing him all this distress. It seemed strange how he was the one speaking as if he were the person who had just survived death. Elsewhere, as a necessary precautionary measure, especially since the second attack had occurred inside the church and was carried out by one of its members, the knights were leading the saint away. Although she initially tried to object to them, taking her, she soon fell silent and began staring at the ground distractedly. In the interrogation room, the crown prince was questioning the attacking priest, who confessed he believed the saint had become defiled because she was exploiting her divine power for her own gain. But he swore he never intended to end her life, and that as soon as his eyes fell upon her, his limbs moved on their own as if driven by a demonic force. The crown prince asked him if he had any idea about the identity of the person who actually attacked him, so he became terrified and completely denied any knowledge of the matter, pleading for them to believe and have mercy on him. But Shane was not convinced. wondering if his ignorance changed the gravity of his crime. He threatened that his fate would be the same whether he ended up on the gallows or was killed in this room. However, the Crown Prince ordered the situation to be calmed and the prisoner to be thrown into a cell for the time being, noting that his focus was on Genevieve alone. During his talk with Shane, the Crown Prince learned that preliminary investigations indicated no conspiracy behind the act of the priest, who was known for his extreme piety, and that the Pope himself was deeply enraged. They concluded that the matter was either a fleeting impulse, as he claimed, or that the possibility of external manipulation was extremely high. When Shane pointed out the possibility of black magic involvement, the Crown Prince explained that if the attacker were under the influence of a spell, he would still be unconscious until that moment. But he claimed that madness had only seized him for a brief moment, and that his consciousness returned to him the instant he struck his victim. Shane suggested that Genevieve might have purified him instinctively. The Crown Prince commented on Shane's confidence in Genevieve's talents, but the Crown Prince denied it, explaining with regret that the current Genevieve is much less capable than those who preceded her. She can heal physical wounds, but she is helpless against diseases, and even breaking the simplest curses takes her days of effort. He added that since she would hear these harsh facts sooner or later, her perseverance should at least be praised. The Crown Prince was surprised by this unusual interest Shane was showing toward Genevieve. So Shane explained that his concern was actually focused on Adeline, who rushes into danger every time she sees the saint in trouble. If she realized how weak Genevieve was, she wouldn't hesitate to risk her life again regardless of any warnings. The Crown Prince was surprised that Shane hadn't locked Adeline in the palace yet, especially given her reckless nature, then reminded his assistant of the founding festival to be held in 2 months and asked for his support. The Crown Prince recalled Shane's actions, saying he used to believe Shane wanted to harm Adeline. For his pursuit of her, his threats, keeping her under guard, up to forcing her into marriage, is fundamentally no different from cruelty. Shane agreed with him, adding that a husband who enters a deadly fit of rage just because his wife was nearly hurt is certainly tormenting his wife in his own way. But he qualified this by explaining that for Adeline, the mere fact of him being her husband is a source of terror in itself. In her bedroom, Adeline was bedridden, and Shane noticed that her fever had risen again. Days had passed since that incident, and her body temperature refused to drop. He decided he needed to call the doctor to adjust her medication dosage, and he realized within himself that worrying about her had become a habit for him. Shane realized that worrying about her and eventually breaking down before her had become a miserable habit for a man living in one-sided love. After locking Adeline up, he deliberately avoided her for a few days. What was for him the culmination of long preparations was for her a sudden catastrophe. She needed time to absorb this new reality, and he feared that if she wasn't given this space, she would have shattered completely, just as had happened to him before. Fortunately, Adeline regained her senses, and although she appeared shocked and agitated as he expected, she was barely holding on to her sanity. He knew that the clever Adeline had likely realized the truth the moment she opened her eyes, that her family were his hostages. This must be why she acted with total obedience without any resistance. Therefore, he didn't need to rush. He only had to wait. Wait until she reflected on his love for them, and let the weight of her guilt crush her. And then she would bind herself and stay by his side quietly. It was a war of attrition, and he promised himself not to be hasty. At least, this was his decision until he arrived late to the gala and witnessed her completely reckless act. He wondered how much she had planned things that day, and whether she intended to let that scum hit her, to use the injury as an excuse to hide, or perhaps to postpone the wedding. Uncovering her schemes was nothing new to him, so he intended to sit back and watch how far she would go. But the moment that scoundrel raised his hand, he felt something snap inside him. He remembered how she screamed his name, asking him to stop, warning him that he would die if he continued. Even after the situation ended, she asked him anxiously if he was still thinking of killing him secretly later. He admitted she had caught him, but reassured her he wouldn't do it. He promised her he would restrain himself, as long as she was the one who asked him not to kill him. He told her he felt relieved to see that her heart was still tender. When she asked what he was talking about, he claimed he was only talking to himself. Inwardly, he admitted that her sympathy for such scum enraged him, but he was happy to know she was still weak, and that this sympathy would become the strongest chain binding her to him. Shane realized that the more Adeline tried to push him away and escape, the more stubborn his feelings for her became. For this reason, he swore he would never let her go again. He wondered if he had finally gone mad, to continue loving a woman who abandoned him and fled. But the truth was that this one-sided love had never ended. Even at the wedding, amidst the laughter and applause, she walked forward as if the person standing beside her didn't matter to her at all. At that moment, he felt a surge of resentment. When he asked her to lift her head, he saw her golden hair like melted sunlight, her cold green eyes shining with tension, and her naturally adorned cheeks and lips. The mere fact that this beautiful face did not pull away from his touch or gaze, and the fact that he could be this happy, seemed completely absurd to him. Perhaps he would never be free from this miserable, unrequited love. Elsewhere, Lloyd was giving instructions to an employee, asking him to dismiss all the servants except those on the list he provided him. When asked about the criteria he followed, Lloyd explained that he excluded everyone who talks too much, yields to financial temptations, or has many weaknesses. It took only 2 days to sort them all out. It took the head butler some time to grasp what had happened. In just 2 days, Lloyd had managed to become familiar with all the weaknesses of the palace staff. He, who the butler thought was just a person brought by his lady to occupy space and nothing more. Meanwhile, the servants' concern was growing regarding the Duchess's health. Although they knew she was receiving treatment, they were confused because the Duke had forbidden anyone from entering her room. But Lloyd was quick to reassure them, asserting it was nothing more than simple exhaustion and that she would recover soon. He added that the reason for this ban was that the Duke himself does not leave her bedside for a single moment. Indeed, Adeline woke up in her bed feeling severe pain in her throat as if she had been coughing all night. In a weak voice, she called for Lloyd, asking for some water. But another hand was the one that gently caught hers. It was Shane who was sleeping beside her, so she asked him to move away because she didn't call for him. He told her that Lloyd was busy and that he was likely more useful than her servant. Adeline was surprised by his behavior, wondering how a grown man could spark a fire of jealousy and competition with a child. But she couldn't help herself. She whispered while still under the influence of the fever that Lloyd was very kind. Shane advised her not to speak because her throat was in bad condition. Then he covered her carefully. Shane looked back in his memory, thinking that he had no choice. He hated the fact that Lloyd possessed eyes similar to his, yet never leaves Adeline's side. He hated him for that reason, regardless of how useful that boy was. In the present, he told her he would bring her medicine and water, and asked her to wait for a few moments. But as he started to leave, Adeline unconsciously grabbed the edge of his shirt. He called her name, realizing she needed her medicine. He looked at her as she drifted into sleep, whispering tenderly, "My little fiancé." He remembered how she had caught him one day, assuring him he wasn't alone and that he had the right to cry. Then she abandoned him and left. In his eyes, she was a traitor. She was always telling him he should be happy, but she left without teaching him how that happiness could be achieved. She wounded him and disappeared, so a sense of bitterness possessed him as he whispered that he hated her because she abandoned him. She was the one who taught him how terrifying this world is without her, so he hated her deeply. Yet at the same time, he couldn't deny how beloved she was in his eyes. Finally, he lay down beside her and embraced her, admitting he couldn't stop this habit. A few days after the attack on the saint, Crown Prince Edwin arrived at the Imperial Palace, asking about her condition. He was told she was still in a state of severe shock and that she had locked herself in her room for days without food. He was surprised at the state of this girl who had been so full of life. She even refused to see her husband, who remained standing outside her door. But her husband, the Imperial Knight Harrison, hurried to correct the information bashfully, explaining she hadn't left him standing. Rather, he was the one waiting of his own free will because he was still on his official duty time. The Crown Prince teased the shy knight, offering to end his shift so he could go and comfort their treasure and show off the charm of the young husband who melted the saint's heart, which increased Harrison's confusion. The Crown Prince remembered how their marriage began in a completely unexpected way. Harrison confessed to Genevieve that he was content to stay by her side so as not to harbor any improper feelings for her. So she surprised him by replying that they should marry. Harrison was completely shocked, so she reminded him she heard him say he admired her. And since she admired him too, it was only natural they should marry. The Crown Prince thought how amazing her marriage proposal was. In the present, Harrison stepped toward his wife's room door, asking permission to enter. The Crown Prince smiled to himself as he watched the situation, thinking what a delightful time it was. The Crown Prince thought to himself that Genevieve's divine power had significantly increased after her marriage, prompting the Crown Prince to comment sarcastically that the reason might be what is called the power of love. But he remembered that the saint's power didn't increase immediately after the wedding. Rather, it seemed strange as this development occurred after her reunion with Adeline. Meanwhile, Lloyd was reproaching Adeline, noting she seemed to have multiple lives or was secretly enjoying the pain. But she angrily denied it, asserting her body moved on its own to protect Genevieve. When he asked her if this was the reason for her suffering now, she answered that the credit for what happened goes to the fact that she finally obtained a thin thread. leading her to the identity of the mage. She firmly believed the attacker was under the control of a mage, as she ruled out that a normal person would suddenly lose their mind and attack the heavily guarded saint. This necessarily meant the mage was present nearby watching what was happening, which made Lloyd scold her for her reckless rush towards someone who was not in their right mind. But she justified her act saying she wasn't alone. She had something to rely on, as Shane was present there with her. Lloyd was enraged, reminding her of the real reason for her being in this place, and how the man she trusts is the one who devised a trap, bribed the newspapers, kidnapped and imprisoned her, and even forced her to marry. She tried to explain the matter to him, but she knew in her heart that Shane did not intend to let her leave. In fact, he wouldn't even let her die as she wished. For this reason, she concluded that staying by his side was the safest option for now. Lloyd felt relieved to see her thinking about things rationally, making her wonder in confusion what he thought of her. Escape was already difficult, but after this recent attack, it became even more difficult, so she decided to do what she could for the time being. She remembered the only clue to the mage's identity in the original story was that he was one of the nobles of the Grenwindsor Empire. Accordingly, she immediately ordered Lloyd to prepare a list of the names of all the nobles who were present in the church that day. Although she hated to admit it, this attack had given her a precious opportunity to narrow down the circle of suspects after she had been completely helpless. She was certain the mage was definitely there. To be able to control someone from a distance, he had to watch the scene closely. This meant he was still watching and waiting for another opportunity to attack. As night fell, Adeline was tossing in her bed, drowning in anxiety and tension from the many things weighing on her mind, and wondered why Shane was late in returning. But she soon blamed herself for this thought, as if she were actually waiting for him. She tried to convince herself her anxiety stemmed from recent events and her fear of sleeping alone, leading another horrific nightmare to haunt her. Finally, she decided to stop thinking and surrender to sleep, but she had barely closed her eyes when Shane entered the room, thinking she was asleep. She told him she was just about to sleep. He justified his lateness by saying the questioning of the suspect took longer than expected. An attempt to kill the saint is not a simple matter that ends with 1 or 2 investigations. He added that as her guardian, he had to follow the matter personally, making him think with regret that he shouldn't have become her guardian in the first place. She tried to reassure him she was fine now, that the fever was gone and she didn't need medicine, and even affirmed to him there were no marks on her neck. Then she thanked him for saving her, but he answered her coldly, which sparked her surprise. He held her chin gently, but she thought to herself that his voice didn't sound like that of someone who was okay. She remembered at that moment how he was trembling as if he were the one subjected to choking when he hugged her after the incident. And she noticed that even now, after days had passed, he was still looking at her with the same tormented gaze. She felt confused and denied the matter, asking him not to look at her this way. Adeline thought to herself she was ready to accept everything he felt for her, whether it was residual attachment, a desire for revenge, or even deep hatred for the fiancé who deceived him. She affirmed that if he wanted to torment her, until all this resentment was gone, she was capable of enduring that no matter how long it took. But she wondered in confusion about the reason for his action, explaining she could accept everything except his love. This feeling specifically, she could never accept. She enumerated for him everything she had done for him. She married him, shared the same bed, and drifted to sleep in his arms every night, believing that if he were satisfied with this much, he would let her leave. Then she asked him what more she had to do. She realized in her heart she couldn't stay by his side, and admitted that since her return, she had given Shane a large space in her life. Then she confronted him, wondering if he wanted her to be miserable, to immediately tell him that she was already miserable, and that merely staying by his side was something beyond her capacity to endure. So he did nothing but beg her in a low voice to stop. Adeline admitted. To herself, she used to feel his warmth every night, which made her drift into a peaceful sleep, and that unconsciously, she believed she would be safe as long as she stayed by his side. This strange feeling continued to accompany her, even though she knew for certain their survival was linked to her departure. For this reason, she could no longer bear it anymore, neither his control nor his feelings. She realized she had to distance herself from him. This was the only way to escape the fate of this story, whose chapters had begun to unfold anew, even if it meant hurting him. In a firm tone, she asked him to let her go, but he looked at her calmly and asked her if she had said everything she had. Then he laughed sarcastically, wondering if she truly thought such words could hurt him. He approached her, whispering that he had already given up on the idea of not loving her. In a sudden movement, he threw her onto the bed, which shocked her immensely. She thought things were never supposed to go this way. Her heart raced as she wondered in terror whether they were heading directly to their true wedding night. So she called his name in tension, but he stopped suddenly and sat on the edge of the bed. She wondered to herself if this was how it ended. Then he asked her mockingly if she was hoping for more, which she denied in a state of panic and confusion. Shane lay beside her relaxedly and reassured her not to worry. He had noticed her disgust and didn't intend to do anything else anyway, so she remained silent, speechless. Adeline thought about his audacity and wondered if he had finished his fit of rage, and admitted to herself she said all those harsh words intentionally to hurt him, but she felt relief just because he looked at her so gently. Shane asked her with a cunning smile what would happen if he were truly angry and whether she would be able to deal with the matter, commenting that she looks like someone who is actually expecting something to happen. Adeline tried to evade, saying she would sleep elsewhere, but he told her to sleep where she was, explaining there was no use because he would follow her wherever she went, so she refused his request. As soon as she started to get up to take a blanket, he grabbed her hand and begged her not to go. Then he told her he couldn't sleep if she weren't by his side, because he feels very anxious. While he was stroking her hair gently, Adeline realized Shane had never changed. He had always been this way with her since their childhood. Her memory took her back when she was a little girl and her dog, Daisy, whom she loved very much, died suddenly. Although they asked her to say goodbye, she couldn't. She was crying bitterly, not believing that her dog, who was healthy yesterday, had suddenly departed. The weight of losing that small life was heavy on her. At that time, the maid told her to comfort her, explaining that puppies sometimes go to heaven for reasons they cannot understand, and suggested they plant beautiful flowers in the place she was buried so she could see her whenever she looked at those flowers. Despite their attempts, she remained unable to control her feelings for days. Remembering her late dog with deep sadness, Shane looked back to their childhood. When he asked the little Adeline if she loved that dog that much, she admitted sadly she truly loved him, especially the way he always loved her. While she was contemplating the flower field, she wondered about the reason for the inevitability of death for every living creature, and whether they could stay together forever. Then Shane held her hand and asked her not to cry, explaining that seeing her this way tore his heart. Then he made her an innocent childhood offer. If she wanted, she could consider him to be that dog from now on. Adeline commented that he was a bit eccentric, which he considered to be a compliment. She explained to him she wasn't looking for a replacement for Daisy, as much as she was afraid of the idea of death and annihilation, whether for a human or an animal. So Shane did nothing but hold her hands more firmly and gave her a firm promise that he would stay by her side and never die. Then he affirmed to her with a look full of seriousness that he would never leave her alone. She noticed his palms were sweaty and his touch was warm. Although it was just a clumsy attempt at comfort, he asked her if his promise meant she wouldn't have to fear anymore. Adeline thought to herself this was nothing but a hollow promise made by a child, but the idea of him staying by her side forever became rooted in her mind. She believed at that time he was just used to her presence, and that days would reveal to him other people he might fall in love with. But she told him she appreciated his attempts to comfort her, and promised him she would watch over his happiness. She assured him she would make him happy, and never let him feel lonely, even if she weren't by his side in the future. He agreed with her words, and at that very moment, she saw in him someone in need of protection, not just a child. Since then, she never questioned his sincerity, but considered the matter just an innocent childhood affection that would fade with time. In the present, despite her harsh treatment of him, she realized he would not abandon her, so she was no longer able to resist him anymore, declaring inwardly her defeat. One day, Adeline was preparing to go out when her mother entered to ask her if she was ready. She reminded her that the Empress had summoned her personally, and there was no room for delay. Adeline reassured her she was almost finished. Her mother expressed her immense happiness, considering what was happening to be like a dream, and that she never imagined she would go with her to the imperial palace again. Adeline looked at her mother with concern while she was telling her she would prepare the carriage, then called her in a low voice. Guilt was haunting her like a vicious circle. She saw in herself a sinner who committed a heinous act against Shane, Genevieve, and her family. She felt that what she did was so disgraceful, she couldn't even ask for forgiveness. Despite her desire to explain her position, she feared her secret would be revealed and someone would die, just as she saw in her nightmares. Something she couldn't bear to live with. She had finally managed to escape those nightmares after she left, but she couldn't believe a whole month had already passed since her return. Suddenly, she realized she hadn't seen a single nightmare since she returned to the capital. She wondered if the story in which she was supposed to die had already ended, and that she might have been pursuing the wrong goal all this time. She concluded that the end of this story might not be her death, but catching the final villain herself. Adeline was shocked, thinking this novel is not a healing romance as she thought, and wondered where the alleged healing went. But she soon gathered her thoughts, deciding not to overthink. In any case, nothing fundamental had changed. She had to catch the mage to maintain the safety of Genevieve and this world. And perhaps after that, if this world continues to exist, even if the hero and heroine don't end up together, it might be acceptable for her to stay with Shane. She wished for the day to come when she could tell him everything, he who never stopped for a day confessing his love for her, and allow herself to finally break down and be able to tell him sincerely, "I will make you happy." She wondered how wonderful that would be. But for all this to come true, she first had to catch that mage. And with this resolve, she prepared to move forward. In the Imperial Palace, Empress Viola received her warmly, commenting she didn't know of her talent for surprising people and that she had truly come back to life. Adeline immediately apologized for the surprise, but felt the situation seemed strangely familiar. Her mother commented that Adeline had barely returned before she began to cause Her Majesty anxiety again, noting she heard how she threw herself in front of someone trying to attack the saint. While Adeline never imagined the Empress would celebrate her return personally, the mother laughed, advising her not to step forward next time if something dangerous happens, and to hide behind anyone close, making Adeline think sarcastically how she could say something terrifying with such a gentle smile. Then the Empress said she considers Adeline as a daughter to her, and that she should take care of herself. Adeline thanked her for her kindness, but the Empress sighed, expressing her regret that increases with time. Then she surprised everyone by asking if it would have been better if Adeline had married her son, the Crown Prince. Her mother tried to remind her of her promise not to say such talk, while Adeline laughed nervously, claiming she didn't deserve such an honor, and thought to herself about the impossibility of her marriage to a womanizer and mysterious person like the Crown Prince. The Empress explained she was already discussing a marriage alliance with a foreign princess, but that princess fell in love with the rebel leader and handed her country over to him. Then she asked to stop talking about the daughter-in-law she lost, because that only increases her depression, making Adeline think sarcastically that there is someone worse than her. Then the Empress revealed the reason for her summoning, which is that she wants a favor from her, helping her find a wife for her son Edwin during the founding festival. She explained she trusts her ability to judge people. She is a young woman who managed to deceive the entire world, and asked her to stay by his side and help him make a wise decision. Adeline agreed immediately, thinking it's better not to interfere in imperial affairs, but she wasn't in a position to refuse the Empress's request. The Empress thanked her, but whispered in regret, "What a shame." After the meeting ended, Adeline felt completely drained and thought no one believes the saint's miracle. When she met Shane, who came to receive her, she told him she feels as if she has aged 10 years. He offered her to return home if she was tired, but she refused, insisting she must see Genevieve before leaving the palace. But Crown Prince Edwin appeared suddenly and told her she wouldn't be able to see Genevieve because she refuses to see anyone except her husband. Adeline was shocked by this news, so Edwin affirmed to her with a smile that Genevieve said she refuses to see her in particular. Adeline didn't grasp what was happening and wondered about the reason, and the Crown Prince commented coldly that she is broken. Adeline was surprised. Genevieve had seen much worse scenes than that as a saint, so it didn't make sense for her to be shocked to this extent just because she witnessed someone's wrist being severed. Another possibility occurred to her. Could Genevieve be angry with her, just as Shane was, because she recklessly threw herself into danger to save her? But Adeline showed total confidence, affirming that if the matter was stubbornness, she wouldn't lose either, and that she would wait until Genevieve agreed to see her. She announced confidently that Genevieve's door would open soon anyway, justifying it by saying the saint loves her. After half an hour, Adeline was still standing before Genevieve's closed room door, begging her to open so they could speak face to face, while Shane was urging her to return, reminding her he would leave in 10 minutes. As for the Crown Prince, he pointed out sarcastically that the saint didn't even agree to see him. So what makes her different from him? Adeline commented on the Crown Prince's excessive confidence, noting he seems to have become close to Genevieve. The Crown Prince replied that he sees her often. Adeline thought the fact of the Crown Prince rushing to the palace as soon as he heard news of the attack indeed indicates they have become close, and resolved to call her for a final time. In a loud voice, Adeline called to Genevieve, wondering if she wouldn't see her again, and threatened her that she would return the next day if she didn't open the door. While she was trembling from her insistence, she resorted to a childish trick, threatening that she wouldn't eat and would starve herself to death if she didn't open the door, making the Crown Prince think sarcastically that Genevieve wouldn't be fooled by such boyish behavior. But the door opened suddenly, and Genevieve appeared, who described what Adeline was doing as completely unfair. Then Adeline stepped forward, asking permission to enter, and Genevieve agreed in a low voice. Inside, Genevieve apologized for her delay in opening the door, justifying it by saying she wasn't well and wanted to be alone. She explained that what she feels is just accumulated exhaustion, not because she is upset with her. Adeline asked to make sure whether she wasn't disappointed in her, but Genevieve admitted sadly that she was indeed disappointed. Adeline wondered in concern if the reason was her grabbing the attacker's arm in an attempt to protect her, affirming to her she didn't intend to die this time. Genevieve shouted in her face, reminding her of what she said previously, and asked her crying if she had already forgotten, for she had told her in the past how much it hurts her to see her not taking care of herself. Her memory took her back to the horrific scenes of the attack, thinking that if the Duke hadn't been there, or if he had been a little late, or if the attacker hadn't given up after losing his hand, or had a partner. Adeline would have truly died this time. Adeline tried to reassure her, explaining she noticed the attack first and that Shane was beside her, and that her body moved on its own because Genevieve was in danger. But the saint interrupted her, affirming she was fine and that she had been subjected to such ambushes countless times. Then Genevieve burst into tears, wondering if Adeline realizes the strength of the god's blessing that protects her. She heals immediately, even if subjected to choking, beating, or starvation for days. Adeline argued with her that according to this logic of hers, she would be fine too if Genevieve healed her. The saint flared with anger, wondering how she could compare herself to her, and Adeline shouted in her face, wondering, "What's the difference?" Then Genevieve revealed the real reason for her anger. It was that she should have been the first to notice that someone was under the influence of black magic. She admitted while sobbing that even if she were a half-mature saint, she should have at least felt that. Adeline shouted in her face, stopping her from describing herself this way. Then her intensity faded, and she told her she understands how worried she is, and that she would stay with her if she wanted to cry. But she urged her not to speak of herself this way again. Genevieve admitted with tears flowing from her eyes she was angry with Adeline, but was more angry with herself, for it was clear that man was under the control of black magic, and she should have been able to break that curse. Genevieve continued her painful confession, explaining that the previous saint was capable of breaking curses and healing people without even touching them, but she is unable to do that. She attributed the reason for that to her being a half-saint and very weak. While tears were flowing from her eyes, she acknowledged that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't do anything. Adeline interrupted her in a firm and affirming tone that she could. Genevieve was surprised by this confidence and asked her how she could be so sure, as if she already knew everything. After a moment of hesitation, Adeline thought she couldn't reveal. The reason is her knowledge of her abilities in the original story, so she simply claimed her intuition tells her so, and that her intuition had never been wrong before. Then she added that if it was difficult for Genevieve to trust herself, and she still felt anxious, she could trust her instead. Genevieve couldn't control herself, and asked her crying how she could trust her to this extent. While no one believes her, even she herself, Adeline did nothing but hug her tightly, affirming it was obvious because she knows how wonderful she is. In Adeline's arms, Genevieve wondered in her heart how her friend could be this solid and strong, unshaken since the first moment they met. Her memory took her back to the hell of her childhood, where her stepfather abused her, accusing her of stupidity and wondering if she wanted him to freeze to death, although she tried to defend herself, explaining he was the one who ordered her to bring water only. He grabbed her hair violently, angry at her audacity to talk back to him, while she was begging him not to hit her and pleading with her mother. The world in her eyes was an ugly place. Her stepfather was always drunk and violent, while her mother turned a blind eye to her desperate pleas out of fear of him, even biting him once in a desperate attempt to defend herself. She ended up fleeing in the snow while he chased her and threatened he wouldn't show her mercy if he caught her. Her childhood was a living hell, and she remembered how she fell in the snow while he approached her brandishing his stick. At that moment, a stranger appeared, and Genevieve remembered then when this person called her by her name, Genevieve Clement. It was Shane Blanchard who appeared riding his horse, but she admitted to herself that even when she met him, she didn't feel she had been saved, for his cold eyes were empty of any trace of feelings as he invited her to go with him, and all she felt toward him at that moment was absolute terror. Nevertheless, she followed him without asking why. The mere idea that she wouldn't be beaten by her stepfather again was enough. After she followed Duke Blanchard and arrived at the Imperial Palace, she became a saint, but this title haunted her. She used to ask herself in confusion what she was doing, for she knows more than anyone else she is not a true saint. Even at that time, she knew she ought to tell the truth, that she is nothing more than a trivial girl. But in the end, words didn't come out of her mouth because she didn't want to return to that hell, where she lived in constant fear of what might be thrown at her, trembling every day from the screaming and violence. She acknowledged to herself that some might criticize her and wonder how she deceived the world for such a trivial reason, but she had already sold her conscience for this very reason, her simple desire to live as a human. She remembered the whispers of the nobles who questioned her being a saint, considering she didn't seem special at all and that she was just an imposter pretending in order to deceive the young duke. She couldn't respond to any of these doubts directed at her, because the weight of guilt was crushing her heart, for the prevailing belief was that the world without a saint would become infinitely defiled and eventually perish, and that the saint alone is the one who can save them. She felt that someone like her could never be this great, and fears possessed her that she might be the reason for not finding the true saint, and that she had endangered the entire world for her greed. She wondered if she should tell the truth now, but but rejected the idea because that meant she would have to return there. A final question haunted her. What if the real saint couldn't save the world because she was the one standing in her way? Her memory took her back to a moment when she was about to confess she wasn't a saint. She remembered the first meeting that brought her together with Adeline, who introduced herself gently as the daughter of Marquis Bertrand. Since that day, everything in her life changed. Adeline invited her to her family's palace almost every day, where they shared warm and comfortable meals, in a place where she was no longer forced to tremble with fear. Adeline opened her eyes to a new world she hadn't dreamed of before. That was the first feeling of peace she experienced in her whole life. Adeline was the person who taught her the true meaning of warmth. For this very reason, her heart was weighted with guilt as she deceived her. She remembered how she once asked Adeline about the reason for her extreme kindness to her. She answered her with a smile that the reason was simply, she is very kind. Genevieve couldn't bear deceiving someone who showed her all this kindness and felt she didn't know how she would repay this favor. So she resolved to tell her that in reality, she isn't a saint. But Adeline interrupted her, affirming she owed her nothing at all, and told her as long as she was happy, this was more than enough for her, making Genevieve feel she was receiving everything without shame. Then Adeline encouraged her to be as happy as she wished, because her happiness is linked to Genevieve's happiness. This situation left Genevieve in confusion. She didn't want to disappoint her. In the end, she decided to wrap her selfishness in those trivial feelings and remain silent for fear of losing Adeline, convincing herself things would be okay if she acted cautiously and no one discovered her secret. But taking the general evaluation into account, she realized she shouldn't have done that. Because of her, Adeline became the subject of a heinous scandal. For whispers began to spread among people, describing her as the girl who enchanted the young Duke of Blanchard, and that she was just a mistress to him and not a saint at all. And they pitied the poor Lady Bertrand who cherishes her so much, while she stole her fiancé. Genevieve couldn't believe she caused such a scandal for the person who treated her with all this warmth. She felt that if she left this place, she would have to return to her home, which she would prefer death over doing. So she wondered in despair what she ought to do. She acknowledged in her heart she was indeed selfish and dirty. And at that moment when she hated even herself, the one who saved her was Adeline, who appeared suddenly and confronted the ladies who were speaking ill of Genevieve, asking them who dared describe her as dirty. It was Adeline who intervened. Genevieve was shocked, realizing Adeline had heard everything, and tried to tell her the matter isn't as she thinks. But Adeline ignored her and confronted the ladies, affirming to them her relationship with Shane is going well, and that her relationship with Genevieve is not dirty, as they think, warning them they might be deceived by a fake saint. Then she announced that Genevieve is not fake, and that she guarantees that in the name of the Bertrand family. By virtue of these words, a holy light emitted from Genevieve, who stood stunned. That single phrase was the spark that unleashed her powers. One of the ladies noticed a strange energy and asked the other to look there in wonder. Although those present were awestruck by the golden light emanating from Genevieve, they wondered in bewilderment if this was truly the holy power. That was the moment Genevieve realized her powers had awakened, albeit only partially. In her heart, she saw Adeline as her eternal savior, the person who always gave her a reason to move forward. She felt that as long as Adeline believed in her ability to do something, she would be able to become as strong as she needed to be. A few days later, in the Imperial Palace's ballroom, the Crown Prince was talking to Genevieve about Adeline. Genevieve noticed that after rejecting all social gatherings following her wedding, she had suddenly increased the frequency of her outings. They concluded that she must be planning something in secret. The Crown Prince expressed his hope that whatever her plans were, they would fail, justifying this by saying he did not want to see Shane lose his mind a second time. However, the calm of the party did not last long. In a sudden moment, the hall's windows shattered and black feathers scattered in the air with a scream calling Adeline's name. Chaos prevailed and screams rose as monstrous bird-like creatures stormed the hall. Adeline looked at the panicked Genevieve and asked how she was. Adeline quickly realized the presence of a summoning circle for the beasts. She deduced that what was happening was the work of black magic. From the heart of that circle, a massive beast materialized, causing the attendees to flee in panic. Amidst the chaos, Shane appeared brandishing his sword to face the beast, which let out a thunderous roar. Then he rushed toward Adeline. He asked her anxiously if she had been hurt, and she reassured him she was fine. Then Genevieve intervened, explaining that she had protected Adeline with her holy power. So Shane ordered her to take Adeline and leave the place immediately. He emphasized that Adeline's safety was the priority, and asked her to return after putting her in a safe place. Although Adeline tried to object, saying she could evade the beasts herself, Genevieve agreed with Shane, promised to protect her, and asked her to follow her. As Shane urged them to hurry, they left the scene. But Adeline looked back anxiously, thinking that Shane must not get hurt at all. Meanwhile, the Imperial Guard moved to protect the dignitaries and prevent the beasts from penetrating further into the palace. The Crown Prince watched what was happening with displeasure, wondering how the Imperial Palace could be breached so easily by black magic, while one of his guards urged him to flee as well. But he remained watching from the balcony and felt relieved when he saw that Genevieve and Adeline were safe for the time being. As they were fleeing, a beast pounced on Adeline, who let out a scream. But Genevieve called out to the beast and unleashed an immense holy power that destroyed it in an instant. Adeline expressed great admiration for Genevieve's ability to annihilate the beast with a single blow. But Genevieve did not feel satisfied. Rather, she considered her skills still lacking. In her heart, she believed that if she possessed the power of the previous saints, she would have destroyed the entire magic circle and defended the whole place instead of just protecting one person. Adeline and Genevieve realized that the beasts were flowing endlessly. At this rate, the entire Imperial Palace would be in danger. Genevieve urged Adeline to hurry and flee to the inner chambers, affirming she would at least protect her. But Adeline knew the situation was not good. Chaos was everywhere, and people were screaming for help. She realized that no matter how strong the Imperial Guard and Shane were, the numbers of the beasts were too great for them to repel. Everyone would be exhausted before that magic circle disappeared. Adeline could not allow Genevieve to be restricted by her in such a situation, and she felt what was happening was meaningless. Genevieve wondered, in shock, if there was a mage capable of using this level of black magic. Then, Adeline asked Genevieve to go help Shane, affirming she would be fine and that Shane would be in trouble at this rate. But Genevieve stood her ground, wondering how long she would continue to pretend to be weak, and explaining that if they stayed this way, everyone would be in danger. So Genevieve gathered her strength and unleashed her holy energy to eliminate the beasts. However, Adeline noticed that Genevieve was panting heavily after using her power. She asked her anxiously if she was okay, but Genevieve knew in her heart that protecting Adeline was the most she could do with her current abilities, and that she could not fulfill what Adeline wished. Adeline thanked Genevieve for her help, affirming she did her best. So Genevieve apologized, considering she had disappointed her again after believing in a worthless person like her. She felt she was always putting Adeline in danger, and when it mattered, she found herself helpless. At that moment, another beast appeared, and Adeline called out to Shane, warning him. She saw the massive beast facing Shane. Without thinking, Adeline pushed Genevieve away, and she headed toward the beast that was about to pounce on Shane. Shane shouted her name, ordering her to get away, but she reached her hand toward him, asking him to come to her. Genevieve screamed her name in horror and thought that the world was never beautiful for her. She felt that God himself had abandoned her, she who had lived a life full of hardship and adversity. Despite that, the only reason that drove her to protect this world as a saint was Adeline alone. She wished for Adeline to live in a safer world. For this very reason, she protected this ugly world. In return, Adeline remembered her words to Genevieve when she asked her to believe in her instead of herself if she found it difficult, affirming that she would always stand by her side. Genevieve wished in her heart to be able to repay the trust Adeline gave her, if only for once. At that very moment, an immense golden glow emanated from her, and a holy power flowed that flooded the entire hall, and the feathers of the demonic beasts scattered in the air. The attendees noticed in a state of awe that the beasts began to fade and disappear completely amidst this bright light. Not only that, but one of the injured knights looked at his wound in great surprise. He saw the wound healing on its own without feeling any pain. The attendees could not believe what their eyes were seeing. The true power of the saint manifested before them, as she hovered in the air surrounded by an aura of light, wondering if this was indeed her latent ability. Later, in the Crown Prince's office, the prince was discussing the repercussions of what happened, considering it annoying that Genevieve's full power woke up in a place crowded with people. Although he reassured her that the attendees did not realize that what they witnessed was a true awakening of her powers, he warned her that her fame would now spread everywhere, and that assassins would become more obsessed with eliminating her. This meant that attacks targeting her would be more direct and persistent from now on, but Genevieve, with all determination, announced she would be grateful for that, as it would give her a sure chance to catch the culprit. She resolved that she would make them pay for putting Lady Adeline in danger. This was a stance the Crown Prince praised, considering it excellent behavior. Then the Crown Prince assigned Duke Shane to take responsibility for the attack's investigation team. Although Shane wondered about the necessity of taking this matter on himself, the prince reminded him of his position as guardian of the saint, and reproached him for sticking to his wife as if they were newlyweds. Shane replied that if Adeline allowed it, he would stay attached to her forever, making the Crown Prince think about his desire to punch him just once. Then the prince suggested that Shane and Adeline move to live in the Imperial Palace throughout the investigation, but Genevieve strongly objected to this suggestion. Genevieve explained that with the increasing danger surrounding the saint, Adeline's presence by her side would become more dangerous. and that he could not expose her to this danger again. Shane agreed with her, and Genevieve mockingly suggested that it was safer to lock Adeline in a cellar or in her family's Bertrand home instead of keeping her by Genevieve's side. This sparked the Crown Prince's displeasure, who wondered about the nature of the look they both had toward Adeline. After commenting on the perfect duo the Guardian and the Saint formed, the Crown Prince ordered Harrison to assist Duke Blanchard and decided to attach one of his knights to the investigation team as well. While Harrison was confirming his compliance with the order, the Crown Prince sank into his thoughts. He noticed that Genevieve's abilities had not developed much throughout the past 5 years, but as soon as Adeline returned, incidents followed one after another, and the Saint's power exploded immensely as if it were waiting for that. He wondered if all this was just a coincidence, concluding that the matter was indeed interesting. That evening, at the Bertrand family residence, news had leaked about the summoning of the beasts at the Imperial Palace. Although the Imperial family tried to keep the matter quiet, the incident was too big to be hidden, especially with several senior guests being injured and then healed by the Saints. Power. While her father was expressing his relief at her safety, Adeline was laughing to herself, for she now realized the reason for being allowed to return to her family home. The whole matter was a plan to put her under her family's strict surveillance to find herself in a practical prison. Despite that, she saw an opportunity in this situation. In Blanchard Palace, she wouldn't have dared to try. But here, she could summon that person. Upon being summoned, an elegant young man appeared before her, introducing himself as Lucian Cole, the Crown Prince of the Underworld, who addressed her by her new title, Duchess of Blanchard, noting that she had finally searched for him. Adeline was surprised by his quick arrival, but he reproached her sarcastically, reminding her of his efforts to help her escape, only for her to return and fall into the trap again like a fool. Adeline thought to herself that Lucian had not changed. He still acts according to his whims, which is the same reason she never planned to meet him face to face again. She explained that contrary to what people believe, money is not his only driver. Rather, there is something more important: pleasure, fun, and debts. Her memory went back to 5 years ago, and she revealed that the reason she was able to get his help in escaping was that, thanks to her knowledge of the original story events, she saved his life and made him indebted to her. All those meticulous arrangements, from the treatment that appeared at the right time, to the corpse that looked like her, and even securing the escape route and the new place of settlement, were all of his orchestration. Then Adeline returned to the present, reproaching him sarcastically for the pain she suffered because of him, before he surprised her by asking what her husband did last time. He revealed to her how Shane managed to track him down, confronted him, while being fully aware of the truth, demanded he hand her over, and even left marks on his face as a kind of threat. Lucian described Shane's angry face then as looking like the face of a demon, which made Adeline think this description was a bit harsh, and she concluded that Lucian must have talked in the end under this pressure. Adeline immediately changed the subject and asked him to search for someone. She explained that she believed all previous assassination attempts were orchestrated by the same culprit. Although she attended many parties to meet everyone who was in the church that day, she was unable to identify any suspect. Lucian pointed to the recent incident of the beasts storming the Imperial Palace, so Adeline asked him to narrow his investigations to those who attended the church prayer and the palace party together. She emphasized her need specifically for any information regarding black magic and mages. When he pointed out that the Imperial Palace was already conducting its investigations, Adeline justified her request, saying they wouldn't share such information with her, and begged him to help her. But he surprised her with a flat refusal. Adeline flared with anger, wondering about the reason for his coming if he didn't intend to help, so he answered coldly that he came to see the face of the fool who fell into the trap again. Lucian explained that he had already paid his debt and was not obliged to help her, but he quickly qualified this by saying he didn't mind helping her for a small fee. Then he began bargaining shamelessly over the price, reminding her that the cost of letting her leave would be greater. But in the end, he agreed to add the matter to her account for now, with the bill to be sent to her later. Before he left, he warned her against angering Shane again, hinting at a previous violent confrontation between them. Adeline told him to send any information he finds through Lloyd and announce the end of their business. Lucian refused to have her accompany him out so as not to draw her family's attention, so Adeline asked Lloyd to handle it instead of her. Outside, Lucian commented on what an annoying girl she is and wondered about her next plan. While Lucian praised Lloyd, describing him as the excellent loyal dog he wished he had continued to raise himself. This talk enraged Lloyd, who clenched his hand, thinking that Lucian was the one who abandoned him first. But Lucian claimed he was the wronged one. He revealed he was testing Lloyd to see how much he could be exploited before Adeline came and took him. Then he mockingly reassured Lloyd that he wouldn't reveal to his lady his past as an assassin raised in darkness who learned how to kill. Lloyd strictly ordered him to stop this nonsense and leave, so Lucian left. mocking himself, describing himself as the villain who withdraws. As Lucian was leaving, he sank into his thoughts, wondering about the secret behind Adeline, that girl who grew up in ease and prosperity, and how she managed to know his place while he was collapsed in a dark alley. He wondered if it was a coincidence that she appeared at exactly the right time to save Lloyd immediately after that. In his eyes, Adeline did nothing but things that piqued his curiosity to the point of madness. A few days after the beast summoning incident, Adeline was wandering outside alone. Surprised that Shane allowed her to go out easily after she had expected him to lock her in the palace, she attributed this to everyone being busy with Genevieve. Meanwhile, Shane was listening to a report from one of his assistants, who told him the Imperial investigation team was pursuing the mastermind behind the incident. Since Lucian had joined the investigation too, they expected to find a thread leading them to the truth soon. Despite all this, Adeline knew she could not stand idly by. There was something only she could do, which was tracking the events of the original story. Adeline thought that the attack on the saint in the church was not part of the original novel, but the beast summoning incident was different. This specific incident was among the events of the novel's first chapters. In the original story, Genevieve was the one who defeated the beast that appeared in the Imperial Palace alone, to clear herself of any suspicion. But what bewildered Adeline was that this event was supposed to happen 5 years ago, and she didn't know the reason for its occurrence now. She remembered that in the novel, after this incident, people's attitudes changed and they treated Genevieve very kindly. But she, because of her doubt in this human hypocrisy, fled to the public square. From that moment, the novel's events accelerated significantly. In that square, Genevieve met for the first time the mage who had his eye on her. This meeting was the spark that ignited the mage's obsession with Genevieve. Adeline realized sarcastically that she was now tracking the path of the story she had tried so hard to avoid, and thought that life is unpredictable, while she was waiting for a report from Lucian that Lloyd would bring to her. Until the time of her meeting with Lloyd, she decided to follow Genevieve's path in the original novel. In the story, Genevieve met the mage while coming out of a cafe, so she convinced herself that what she was doing was part of the investigation. While she was thinking that she might meet the mage too if she followed the same steps, her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of a little girl calling for her mother. She looked at the warm family scene, where the mother was warning her daughter not to fall. Strange feelings overwhelmed her as she thought that all these people are just characters in a novel, and wondered about the roles they play, and whether the people not mentioned in the original story had any role at all. She realized that this world was no longer just a world inside a novel, but had become alive and vibrant for her. It is the world she must continue to live in. At that moment, Lloyd appeared calling her. She asked him immediately if Lucian had found anything, and he told her he had news regarding the saint first. Lloyd told her that Genevieve had left on a retreat trip with her husband, which Adeline considered normal news, especially since the saint must be exhausted and in need of rest. Then Lloyd added that he had another story regarding the mage, and asked her if she knew a place called the Kingdom of Propin. Adeline replied it was the first time she had heard this name, so Lloyd explained to her that it is a small kingdom located on the western border of the Greenwater Empire. Although it had a small area and mountainous terrain, it was famous for its advanced industries in the field of forestry and mining, and it was said to be a place where one could live a decent life. As for the Kingdom of Propin, 14 years ago, it witnessed a massive magical explosion. Adeline was surprised by her ignorance of this momentous event, so Lloyd explained to her that the reason was her young age then, plus the incident did not cause any direct damage to the Empire, so it did not receive extensive media coverage. But the Kingdom of Propin itself suffered massive damage. Its land became barren, its trees withered, and beasts began to appear. As a result, the kingdom turned into the weakest of kingdoms ever. But Adeline deduced that the magical explosion was certainly the work of the mage. Despite that, the rumors coming from there seemed a bit different. After the explosion incident, a mage appeared capable of controlling beasts, and it was said he was working to save the destroyed kingdom of Propin. This mage, who was said to protect the kingdom's people by subduing the beasts, was revered as if he were a god, taking into account that beasts are creatures that even the greatest mages cannot control. Lloyd told Adeline that this was all he heard from Lucian so far, and that the latter would continue his investigations, so Adeline thanked him for his effort. Adeline thought all these stories were not mentioned in the original novel, and it seemed illogical for a hero who saved a dying kingdom to attack the Imperial Palace. But what worried her was his ability to control the beasts. She felt lost, for every time she tried to gather information, the things she didn't know became more complex. While she was lost in her thoughts, she was interrupted by Shane's voice, who suddenly appeared and called her name. He hugged her from behind, whispering that he missed her. Adeline was surprised by his presence and asked him how he knew her place. And he answered her sarcastically whether she truly thought he would allow her to go to her family home without any guard. knowing she might flee at any moment. Adeline realized at that moment the reason for his allowing her to go out so easily. She understood they were all complicit together, and that her brother Jeff's approval for her outing was only part of the plan. She tried to prevent Lloyd from leaving, but Lloyd explained he would do it to make things easier for her, while Shane commented on his quick wit. Then he wondered if she was angry, noticing her grim face, so she reproached him for monitoring her wherever she went. He admitted he had asked a pointless question. Shane whispered in her ear to forget what he just said, and kissed her on her forehead. So Adeline understood those words of his meant he had given up on the idea of being loved by her, and that he intends to continue loving her regardless of whether she reciprocates the feelings or not. He assumed she, of course, hates him, but in her heart she wanted to correct this assumption. But she felt the time had not yet come, for she had not caught the real villain in the original story. She resolved that if she managed to survive after catching the culprit and ending the story, she would certainly give him an answer and would tell him that she loves him too, and that she wants to be happy with him. So she asked him to wait for her a little longer. Adeline suddenly changed the subject and asked Shane about the updates of the Imperial investigation team, and he told her he had come to inform her of the matter. He revealed to her that they had finally caught the culprit. Adeline couldn't believe what she heard, and asked him in a state of shock about the culprit's identity and how he was caught. He told her the culprit had revealed himself. He had attacked the saint again. Adeline went accompanied by Shane to the Imperial Palace. Shane reassured her there was no need to worry, and that Genevieve was not severely hurt, which piqued Adeline, who wondered about the meaning of not being severely hurt. She explained that even if the plan aimed to lure the culprit, Genevieve had volunteered to be the bait, and wondered about the reason that would drive her to do such a thing. Shane asked her if she was truly worried about her, so she answered him angrily that of course she's worried. Genevieve doesn't realize her importance, as she threw herself into danger alone, but she soon realized this talk of hers might seem hypocritical to Shane. She apologized to him immediately, but he understood her position, affirming he felt exactly what she felt. Upon their arrival, Adeline rushed toward Genevieve's room, calling her name. She asked her anxiously if she was truly okay, but she was surprised when she found Genevieve standing calmly, who welcomed her, saying she had already arrived. Adeline didn't grasp the situation, so Shane pointed out to her that Genevieve was fine, as he told her. With a calm smile, Genevieve asked Adeline if she was angry with her, for the features drawn on her face were exposing everything. Adeline denied the matter, but Shane described her as a liar, and Shane asked her to relax her facial expressions. Adeline sighed, realizing the reason behind Genevieve's trip with her husband was nothing but a disguise to be bait. A few hours ago, at a resort outside the capital, Genevieve's husband, Harrison, was expressing his concern, but she reassured him. She explained to him they are not alone. The Royal Guard and Duke Blanchard were securing the entire area. Then she added confidently, she is the saint who saved the palace from disaster, and asked him to trust her a little. Harrison seemed moved as he called her name. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell, and a red magic circle began to form around their boat. Genevieve realized the mage had swallowed the bait. She felt his presence nearby, while Shane was issuing his orders to seal off the entire area and not allow anyone out. Harrison warned Genevieve of the danger, but she affirmed to him this doesn't compare to what happened last time. Then she reassured him again as she unleashed her power, affirming to him she was no longer the same person she was in the past. An immense holy light emitted from her, but she felt a strong reverse effect. So Shane realized this was the reaction of nullifying the spell and ordered his men to search in the direction the power bounced to. At that moment, they managed to surround a man wearing a red cloak and announced they had caught the mage. In the present, Genevieve was telling Adeline what happened, explaining that the magical shock was strong enough to shake the boat, but thanks to the Guardian and his grace, she wasn't hurt. Then she expressed her disappointment because she couldn't introduce her to her husband again. He had returned hurriedly. Genevieve continued talking enthusiastically, affirming she would certainly introduce Adeline to her husband next time, while Adeline was eyeing her with a frustrated look, thinking the saint doesn't feel the slightest bit of regret for her reckless act of exposing herself to danger. But she clearly noticed that Genevieve had become stronger and more steady, as the latter smiled gently and reassured her never to worry about her, affirming she was perfectly fine. Adeline sighed with obvious relief, admitting she was extremely worried, and expressed her immense happiness at her safety. Genevieve returned a bright smile, confirming her sincerity and gratitude. Adeline wondered curiously about the identity of the true culprit, so Shane answered her that he was someone from within the church, specifically a priest who learned the dark arts, commenting with bitter irony on how dirty the situation was, that it would have been funny if not for its ugliness. Adeline was extremely surprised and asked about the motives that would make a priest try to kill the saint, so Shane explained that the whole matter goes back to a hidden power struggle between the church and the imperial throne. Shane went on in his explanation, showing that the saint technically falls under the control of the empire, but but the Pope at the same time holds her in high regard and wants to keep her on his side. He added that if Genevieve were to become the next pope, the entire church might fall under the control of the empire, and this is what certain factions within the church feared. Genevieve described the situation as very chaotic and affirmed the pope's advanced age pushed these conspirators to lose their patience and move recklessly, making Adeline wonder if the previous attack on the palace banquet was related to this struggle too. Shane explained they need to exert more pressure in the investigations to confirm that, but they suspect that attack was a warning to the saint and the imperial family alike. If nobles were hurt and the palace failed to manage the crisis, people would rally around the church seeking safety. Adeline was disgusted by these dirty political machinations, but Genevieve tried to calm her, affirming there was no longer a need to worry now. The saint confidently announced they had finally caught the culprit, and that everything was over. The word over echoed in Adeline's mind with her eyes widening, and she returned in her memory to the events of the original novel, where the mage behind all those disturbances was indeed caught, and the crisis was resolved to end up with a happy ending for everyone. She realized that although the journey to reach this point and the heroes' paths were completely different this time thanks to her interventions, in the end they had reached the same conclusion the original story came to. Adeline thought to herself as she looked up that everything might truly be over, and wondered with a flutter in her heart if she had finally been freed from the bonds of the original novel and her inevitable fate as a villainess. It seemed to her the fixed story had already concluded, and that every character had broken the bonds of their written fate to finally be able to live their own life freely. For here is Genevieve proceeding on her own path with her husband in happiness and tranquility, and Shane proceeding on his path steadily, while she finally proceeds on her own path as Adeline. Tears flowed from her eyes in silence against her will, as she wondered in disbelief whether this salvation was real. Adeline suddenly collapsed on her knees, which panicked Shane and Genevieve, who rushed to her and sat beside her, calling her with great concern to find out what happened to her. Adeline remembered at that moment how she always believed she must abandon her loved ones, memories and feelings, and strip herself of everything and just hide for the sake of survival, as she lived as if surviving in this world was her sole and supreme goal. In the arms of Shane, who supported her, she continued to cry bitterly, thinking that if she had known things would end this easily once the culprit was caught, she wouldn't have struggled in that desperate way and fled far away, and she wouldn't have caused all this pain and harm to the people she considers dear to her heart. Shane asked her with extreme concern while embracing her what happened to her, so Adeline found nothing amidst her tears but to apologize repeatedly to him and to Genevieve. She kept repeating her deep regret while crying in complete breakdown in Shane's arms, while Genevieve knelt beside them in an attempt to comfort and embrace her too. Later, inside the Crown Prince's office, the prince entered jokingly, wondering with a smile if he had interrupted an intimate moment in his office, only for Genevieve to coldly ask him not to mock them. Shane was sitting on the sofa, placing the sleeping Adeline's head on his lap, explaining to the Crown Prince he wasn't sure what happened exactly, but she seemed very relieved after hearing news of the mage's capture, and continued crying until she drifted to sleep from extreme emotional exhaustion. Shane asked the Crown Prince if the interrogations with the culprit had ended, and he replied, "They ended for today at least, but he feels the matter will be long and will require more time." The Crown Prince commented cheerfully that he was subjected to a strong blow because of their dear saint and her machinations, while Genevieve, who seemed exhausted, begged him to stop joking with her. The Crown Prince placed his hand on his chin seriously and set the joking aside, pointing out that the real problem now lies in that the culprit's testimony is full of loopholes and contradictions that need to be resolved. The Crown Prince explained that the captured culprit had confessed his responsibility for the attack on the saint, but he claimed he was executing someone else's orders, noting that his memory regarding that unknown person's identity was strangely blurry and mysterious. Furthermore, the culprit completely denied any connection to or involvement in the beast summoning incident that occurred inside the imperial palace. Genevieve told the Crown Prince this second claim is very possible and acceptable, as the magical energy she sensed over the lake was much weaker than that immense power that accompanied the previous incident, while the Crown Prince commented that if this mage were the one who received the reverse effect resulting from Genevieve's destruction of those beasts, then he would have certainly been at death's door. While looking at Adeline, who was in a deep sleep, the Crown Prince emphasized they must not let their guard down or be reassured by the current situations. He concluded his talk with a concerning fact, affirming that the real mastermind behind all these machinations might still be at large, lurking in the shadows.